and CEO rushes to help a woman and child stranded in a snowstorm, only to discover they're the secret family he never knew he had. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Snow whipped against the tall windows of the secluded mountain cabin, each gust of wind howling like a wounded animal in the night. Inside, powerful CEO Daniel Kensington tried to concentrate on the flickering fire he'd just stoked, his eyes occasionally glancing at the swirling chaos beyond the glass. He had come to this remote retreat expecting solitude and the chance to finalize a major acquisition deal by phone. Yet something in the icy air tonight felt different, an unsettling disquiet hovering on the edges of his mind. Daniel was used to controlling every aspect of his life. His multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, Kensington International, was respected and sometimes feared by competitors worldwide. In the city, his sleek corner office towered above the skyline. His schedule was a relentless march of meetings, decisions, and dinner galas with powerful people. Up here in the mountains, however, all the typical noise vanished. This was where he retreated when deals became too heated or when his board needed him to remain unreachable, forging alliances in secrecy. He glanced at his watch, 9:30. The snowstorm outside had escalated from a gentle flurry in the early evening to a blizzard that threatened to bury the gravel road connecting the cabin to the main highway. With each fresh blast of wind, he wondered if the power would hold out. There was a generator, but it hadn't been tested for years. The caretaker had left behind extra firewood, and Daniel made sure to stack more logs into the hearth, just in case. The unexpected knock came so abruptly that he almost dropped the fire poker. At first, Daniel thought the sound was just another shriek of wind. But then it came again, a frantic rap on wood that made his spine tingle. He stood up, smoothing the sleeves of his expensive sweater, and walked to the door. At the threshold, a strange sense of déjà vu washed over him, though he couldn't say why. When he pulled it open, the wind nearly slammed it back in his face. Through the dancing snowflakes, he saw a figure hunched over, holding something close. Perhaps a child. Beneath the hood of a soaked coat stood a woman with large, frightened eyes, her cheeks flushed red from the icy air. Her hair, damp and half-frozen, clung to the edges of her face. She looked up at Daniel with desperation. "Please," she managed to say, voice shuddering. "Our car's stuck, and the heater died. We have nowhere else." Daniel didn't wait for the rest. Even if his heart was usually guarded, this was no time for questions. A child was involved, and the storm had turned life-threatening. "Come in," he commanded, stepping aside. He expected them to hurry past, but the woman hesitated, as if uncertain whether she could trust him. Snow blew past her ankles, swirling on the wooden floor. At last, she nodded and entered, carrying a small boy whose face was buried against her chest, trying to keep warm. The moment they crossed the threshold, Daniel closed the door firmly. Warmth from the fireplace embraced them, the golden glow illuminating the boy's wide eyes. The child was maybe 3, possibly 4, with brown hair curling at his temples. He clung to the woman, his mother, presumably, and blinked uncertainly at Daniel. I'm sorry to barge in," the woman began, shifting the child's weight in her arms. "But the roads and the storm, it got so bad that my car just spun out into a ditch. Are either of you hurt?" Daniel's authoritative voice softened slightly as he surveyed them. He noticed the pale color of her lips, the exhausted slump of her shoulders. The boy looked exhausted too, his small hands trembling from the cold. She shook her head. "No, just cold and scared. I couldn't get any phone signal to call for help." Her words trailed off as she tried to calm the child, stroking his hair. Daniel grabbed a spare blanket draped over the couch and offered it. He wasn't used to playing the role of benevolent host. Most people in his presence were either employees seeking favor or rival executives watching their every word. This situation was a far cry from any boardroom. Still, Something about this shivering pair pulled at him. "What's your name?" he asked gently, voice echoing in the hush of the cabin. She exhaled, her breath unsteady. "Emily, and this is Jacob." The little boy looked at Daniel, and for an instant Daniel's heart twisted. He couldn't place the emotion. It was too sudden, too unfamiliar. "Daniel Kensington," he said simply, though he knew the name likely carried weight. If Emily recognized it, she gave no sign. She was preoccupied removing the boy's soaked mittens. Daniel shot a glance toward the child, who wore a puzzled expression, as if trying to figure out whether to be afraid of this tall stranger. "Let's warm you both by the fire," Daniel suggested. "I'll make some hot chocolate if I can find the packets." "Does he—" He paused, uncertain how to address a small child. "Does Jacob like marshmallows?" Emily nodded and followed him toward the fireplace. The boy nestled closer to his mother as they settled on an armchair. A wave of memories tugged at Daniel's mind, remnants of a youth he tried never to revisit. Growing up, he'd known what it was like to feel unwelcome, to rely on strangers, even if only briefly. Something about this moment sent a jolt through his consciousness. He stepped into the small kitchen area, rummaging in the cabinets for the dusty tin of cocoa. The caretaker always stocked basic supplies. For a man who thrived on delivering bullet-point directives at board meetings, opening a can of chocolate mix and heating milk on a battered old stove felt unusual, almost domestic. Over the roar of the wind outside, he could hear Emily murmuring softly to Jacob, reassuring him they were safe. He wondered how long they'd been out there in the storm before finding his cabin. When the milk was finally warm and the cocoa was stirred, Daniel poured it into 2 mugs. Then, after a last-minute search, he found a small bag of marshmallows, hard and stale from months of neglect. He placed them on top anyway. In the living room, the firelight shone on Emily's face, revealing subtle lines at the corners of her eyes that spoke of worry and heartbreak. She must have sensed Daniel watching because she quickly forced a smile. "Thank you," she said, taking one of the mugs. "I appreciate this more than you know. We were driving up from the city, trying to reach my friend's place before the storm got worse." Daniel nodded. He wanted to ask how exactly they'd ended up on the isolated road leading to his property, but withheld the question. First, they needed to recover from the cold. Jacob sipped the warm drink, occasionally peering up at Daniel. Something about the boy's gaze unsettled him, a flicker of familiarity in those dark eyes. It must be the exhaustion, he thought. Emily began explaining that she was a single mother, searching for better opportunities. The job she'd relied on had fallen through, and times were tough. Her plan was to stay with a friend temporarily. She'd hoped to outrun the storm, but fate had other ideas. As she spoke, Daniel found his mind drifting. The name Emily tugged at his memory. Or was he mixing her up with someone from his past? He refocused, busying himself by adding more logs to the fire. The flames crackled, casting dancing shadows on the old log walls. Emily's voice had a trembling quality, as though each sentence was carefully weighed before it left her lips. He understood guardedness well. It was the language of survivors. The night stretched on, with the wind outside refusing to relent. Occasionally, the windows rattled, and both Emily and Jacob would jump, the child clinging tighter to his mother. Daniel reassured them that the cabin was sturdy, built decades ago for harsh winters. Still, he offered them the use of the downstairs bedroom. For a moment, Emily hesitated, pride and caution warring in her expression. "We don't want to impose," she murmured, cradling Jacob's head. "You're not imposing," Daniel replied firmly. Then a rare smile curved his lips. "Besides, you won't get far in this snow." Eventually, fatigue wore them down. Emily let Daniel show her the room. Jacob had fallen asleep against her shoulder, lulled by warmth and cocoa. Daniel watched her set the boy on the bed, pulling the blankets over him. It was an intimate snapshot of a life he never allowed himself, a mother and her sleeping child. An inexplicable ache rose in his chest. He pushed it down, attributing it to the unusual circumstances. When he returned to the living room, he caught sight of an old college photograph on the bookshelf, a relic he normally kept hidden from visitors. In that photo, Daniel stood with a group of fellow graduates at a campus event. His arm was around a woman whose face was half hidden by the angle, her eyes bright with optimism. The memory was so distant he rarely thought of it. Still, his gut twisted as he recalled how quickly those days had vanished, replaced by corporate ambition. He heard a soft step behind him and turned. Emily was at the threshold, uncertain. "I just wanted to thank you," she whispered, arms crossed against the lingering chill. Not everyone would open their door to strangers. Daniel nodded, noticing how the firelight made her eyes gleam. "I'm glad I was here. Not many neighbors around." "No," she agreed softly. It felt as though the wind had swallowed all traces of civilization. She paused, scanning the shelves, then her gaze settled on the photograph. Immediately her face went blank, and she looked away. "Good night," she said quickly, retreating before Daniel could respond. He stood there, confusion swirling in his thoughts. What was it in that photo that made her uneasy? The hush fell again, broken only by the raging snowstorm and the crackle of flames. Alone in the dim light, Daniel's thoughts returned to the odd flicker of recognition he'd felt upon seeing Emily. Was it simply guilt at the reminder of his own past struggles, back when he had dreams and illusions instead of empire building and cynicism? Or was there a deeper connection? His phone chimed, jarring him from introspection. It was a signal from his corporate offices, a reminder that the acquisition documents needed final review. The timing of real life felt jarring, almost cruel, against the drama unfolding in his rustic sanctuary. But Daniel, steeling himself, forced his attention back to business. That was familiar terrain, after all. Outside, the wind refused to die down. Snow piled high against the door, ensuring no one would leave by morning. Upstairs, the newly arrived mother and child tried to find rest in a place that, until now, had held only Daniel's solitary visits. The swirling storm had brought them together, forging a fragile connection. Daniel suspected that, come daylight, the real questions would begin, and perhaps answers he never expected. He returned to the fireplace, stirring the embers until the flames blazed higher. In the hush of the storm, his mind flicked back to that photograph on the shelf, to the half-smiling face of a woman from his college days. An old ache pulsed in his chest. He'd spent years burying certain memories, believing they'd lost significance. Yet the wave of unease told him otherwise. Somewhere beneath the howling of wind and the soft crackle of burning logs, an unspoken truth seemed to whisper in the dark. Whatever secrets Emily carried, they were entwined with his own, and neither could remain hidden much longer. By the time the first light of dawn broke through the drawn curtains, Daniel had barely slept. He found himself pacing restlessly in the cabin's small living room, his mind cycling between the corporate matters pressing him from miles away and the strange swirl of feelings roused by last night's unexpected guests. The storm still raged outside, though the furious onslaught of snow had lessened to a persistent, unrelenting drift. In the glow of early morning, Daniel realized the drifts were so high that any attempt to leave now would be futile. The winding road was surely impassable. He took a moment to inspect the outer deck. Opening the door a crack, he felt the cold air punch his lungs and swirl inside, a frigid blast that reminded him just how isolated they truly were. Snowbanks nearly rose to his waist out there, and the flurries continued to add layers upon layers of winter's thick cloak. Shivering, Daniel retreated indoors. In the kitchen, he put on a pot of coffee, his usual morning ritual no matter the setting. The hiss of the brew offered some comfort, grounding him in routine, yet his nerves bristled with thoughts of his uninvited visitors asleep in the next room. He fought the urge to check on them, reminding himself that Emily and Jacob needed rest. It was enough to hear the faint murmur of voices through the closed door, letting him know they were awake and safe. He tried to distract himself by flipping open his laptop. The cabin's internet connection ran off a satellite-based router, not the strongest signal in this weather, but he hoped it might be enough to check a few urgent emails. There, in the glow of the screen, he confirmed what he already suspected. A cluster of pressing messages flagged by his senior vice president, some from the company's legal advisors. Each demanded his immediate attention regarding the upcoming acquisition, yet the signal blinked in and out, the snowstorm wreaking havoc on any stable communication. Daniel typed a few words only to see them vanish as the connection dropped again. With a frustrated sigh, he slammed the laptop shut. The frustration went deeper than mere business concerns. He'd spent all night replaying Emily's face in his mind, the way she'd gasped upon seeing that single photograph on his bookshelf. He could swear there was more in that reaction than just idle curiosity. Even the boy, Jacob, had stared at him with an uncanny sense of recognition. For all the times Daniel had made snap judgments about other people, he now felt himself in the precarious position of not knowing what he should ask or how he should act around these two. He poured a mug of coffee, black and strong, then carried it with him to the living room. The place still bore that faint sense of hush, as if the very walls were holding their breath. He set the coffee down to stoke the fire, building it back to a roaring blaze that might ward off the biting air. As sparks danced, Daniel's mind drifted to the timeline of his life, how everything seemed so meticulously arranged until now. He was in his mid-30s, well-established, with no family obligations except the distant paternal side that seldom crossed his path. He'd successfully avoided messy personal entanglements, focusing instead on forging a path to the top of the corporate ladder. It was an unquestioned truth that had guided him for years, until a knock on his door last night changed that. A soft click made him glance up. Emily stood in the doorway between the bedroom and living room, looking pale but composed. She wore a borrowed sweatshirt he'd left on a dresser long ago, the sleeves pushing halfway up her forearms. Her hair, still slightly damp from last night's ordeal, cascaded in gentle waves around her shoulders. For a heartbeat, Daniel just stared at her, grappling with a flicker of memory. "Morning," he said, more quietly than he intended. He stood up, reflexively adjusting the cuffs of his sweater, a habit he'd developed to project confidence in boardrooms. Emily gave a polite nod, clearly unsure how to address him. She'd learned his last name, but perhaps not his significance. "Good morning. I hope it's all right. I borrowed this from the closet." Her arms crossed over her chest as though bracing for judgment. Jacob's still asleep. The poor thing was exhausted. "Of course, anything you need," Daniel replied. An awkward pause settled between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. "Coffee?" She nodded appreciatively. That would be great. He gestured for her to follow him to the small kitchen area. The cabin's design was rustic and open, with heavy wooden beams overhead. Emily hovered near the table while Daniel prepared a fresh mug for her. Steam rose, carrying the aroma of roasted beans, an oddly comforting smell amid the tension. Once she wrapped her hands around the mug, Emily let out a shaky breath. "Thank you again for letting us stay," she said, eyes on the swirling black surface of her drink. "I can't imagine what might have happened if we'd stayed outside much longer. The roads—" She shook her head, as if she couldn't finish the thought. Daniel tried to reassure her. "Look, you did what anyone would do in a crisis. Find help. I just happened to be here. If I'd come a day later, you might have found an empty house." "That would have been even worse," Emily murmured, a shadow crossing her expression. She forced a small, grateful smile, then took a careful sip. Daniel watched her carefully. Up close, he noticed the faint freckles across her cheeks, a detail that tugged at his memory. His heart twisted unexpectedly, like a puzzle piece hovering near the right spot, but not clicking in place. "I hope you both slept well," he said, voice uneven. Emily nodded. "Well enough." Jacob kept waking up, but he finally settled around dawn. I'm sorry if we disturbed you." Daniel shook his head. "I was awake anyway." He hesitated, unsure how to steer the conversation. Normally, with a business associate or a colleague, he'd direct the dialogue with precision, but this was different. "Do you think your car can be salvaged or—" "Probably not in this snow," she finished for him. "And honestly, even if we got it out of the ditch, I'm not sure how far we'd get without chains." The radio on the drive up said this could be a record snowfall. A heartbeat of stillness passed. Then, with a deep breath, Emily looked him in the eyes, as though searching for something. Do you live here alone?" He cleared his throat. "Not exactly. This place is my getaway when I need to be off the grid or want some quiet to finalize business deals, but I still mostly reside in the city. This is just a—" He struggled to find the right word. "A retreat, I guess." She nodded, as if that made sense. Then, before he could ask anything more, Emily's face softened with motherly concern. "I should check on Jacob, he might be up by now." Carefully placing her mug on the counter, she slipped back down the hallway, leaving Daniel to ruminate on 100 unspoken questions. He stared after her for a moment, then grabbed his phone again. With the storm, he had almost no signal, and there was little chance of a stable connection. For a man so used to controlling every facet of his life, the powerless feeling was foreign and unsettling. Midway through, half-heartedly checking his phone for bars, Daniel looked up to see a small figure in the living room doorway. Jacob, rubbing sleepy eyes with the back of one hand, the other hand clutching a battered stuffed animal. The boy blinked at Daniel, lips parted as though uncertain whether to speak. Daniel set the phone aside. "Morning, buddy." His voice came out gentler than expected. The child's presence made him realize how little practice he'd had interacting with children of any age. Jacob mumbled something inaudible, stepping forward. He had wide eyes, brown, flecked with gold, that shone with curiosity. Daniel motioned for him to come closer. Eventually, the boy took timid steps until he reached a seat near the fireplace. "Is it still snowing?" Jacob asked in a small voice. "Yeah," Daniel answered. "A lot, but we're safe in here." He didn't know if children needed reassurance in words or gestures, so he smiled as kindly as he could manage. "Your mom's in the kitchen. She'll be back soon." Jacob nodded, hugging his stuffed animal, a little dog with one missing button eye. They lingered in companionable silence, the child's gaze wandering around the spacious room. Without the layered stress of last night, Daniel had a chance to observe how delicate the boy's features were, his slightly upturned nose, the softness of his cheeks. An unbidden thought bloomed in Daniel's mind, prompting a sharp pang of recognition. They looked alike. Was that possible? He quickly dismissed the notion. Must be a trick of the lighting or some random similarity. Yet the unease wouldn't leave him. He reached for a box of cereal on the kitchen counter. "You hungry?" he offered, noticing Jacob's watchful expression. "I don't have much kid-friendly stuff, but we can figure something out." Jacob nodded eagerly, sliding off the chair to follow him. In a matter of minutes, Daniel found himself pouring cereal into a small bowl and adding milk, aware that he'd done this maybe once or twice in his entire adult life. The boy peered in with anticipation, as if this was the best breakfast in the world. As Jacob began to eat, Daniel tried to recall the last time he'd felt so unguarded around anyone. Board members, clients, even his personal assistants. They all looked to him for leadership, for perfect composure. Here, in the hush of the storm, with a 3-year-old boy at the table, Daniel sensed a different side of himself stirring. Emily reappeared, pausing briefly to take in the scene. Her son perched at the table, Daniel hovering uncertainly, arms folded, as if ready to intervene if something went awry. Her smile was instant, filled with gratitude. "You're a natural caretaker," she observed softly, crossing the small space. He nearly laughed out loud. I doubt that. I'm honestly not sure what I'm doing. You're doing fine, she said, giving Jacob a playful ruffle of his hair. The child beamed at his mother, then continued munching away. Daniel cleared his throat. Emily, about last night. You seemed startled by something in here. He spoke carefully, not wanting to invade her privacy. That old photograph on the bookshelf, maybe. I noticed you looking at it. Her face went pale, though her posture remained calm. For a moment, she gripped the back of a chair for support. Oh, that... Yes, She glanced at Jacob, hesitating, then lowered her voice. It reminded me of someone I knew back in college. A fleeting resemblance, that's all. Daniel swallowed. The words hammered at him. College? He repeated, mind churning with possibilities. She pressed her lips together as if silently regretting her admission. Then she forced a brittle smile. Probably just my imagination. It was late. I was exhausted. He considered pressing further. The urge to ask if they had met before hovered on the tip of his tongue. But seeing how tightly she clutched the chair, how her face betrayed uncertainty, Daniel backed off. All right, he relented gently. If you need anything, warm clothes, more blankets, just say the word. We're going to be stuck here until the storm calms, so might as well make ourselves comfortable. For a moment, the tension thawed. Emily touched Jacob's shoulder, reminding him softly not to let the milk spill. Daniel stepped away, feeling that same twinge in his chest. There was a secret in this cabin, a history crossing invisible boundaries, rearing its head after years of dormancy. He couldn't put a name to the sense of déjà vu swirling around him, but he knew one thing. The moment the weather allowed, he would find out. Hours trickled by in the flickering light of the fireplace. Outside, daylight glowed through thick clouds, revealing an endless expanse of white. Daniel let his watchful side retreat momentarily as he guided Emily around the cabin, showing her the storeroom with extra supplies, the closet with older coats that might fit her slender frame better than his own. She listened politely, stepping carefully around the place as if it were hallowed ground. Jacob, still full of energy despite his previous exhaustion, trotted after them, occasionally pointing out interesting objects, like the row of antique rifles displayed above the mantel, all unloaded and for decoration, or a vintage cuckoo clock that squeaked irregularly in the dining nook. Even as they moved through the cabin, Daniel sensed Emily's subtle disquiet. Her eyes darted from photo to photo, sometimes lingering on the edges of each frame as though searching for something. Daniel wondered if she was looking for more pictures of the same woman from his college photo, or was she scanning for clues about Daniel's personal life? In a corner of his mind, he braced himself for the possibility that she already knew far more than she let on. Toward midday, they reconvened in the living room. The fire crackled, casting a pleasant warmth over the rustic furniture. Emily sat cross-legged on the sofa, Jacob dozing off beside her with his stuffed animal, lulled by the constant lullaby of the snow. Daniel lowered himself into the armchair opposite them. I can't say how long the storm will last, he began, keeping his voice soft so as not to wake the boy. But you're welcome to stay until the road's clear. After that, I'll make sure we get your car towed, or at least arrange proper transportation for you both. Her gratitude was evident, though tempered by a weariness that overshadowed her features. Thank you, she repeated, for what felt like the 100th time. Then, almost as an afterthought, her eyes flickered down to her hands. I really appreciate it. Daniel nodded, feeling that their conversation was approaching a deeper topic, one he suspected might break open more revelations. In that silent interval, a single question pulsed through his thoughts. Who was Emily, really? He wanted to ask, but paused, measuring how best to proceed without shattering the fragile peace. For now they were simply two people trapped by a snowstorm, forging an uneasy alliance in the face of nature's fury. The rest of it, Answers about old college memories, about that photograph, about the child's father, could wait. Yet Daniel felt certain of one thing. The truth, like the unstoppable force of the storm, would not remain hidden for much longer. At midday, the sky outside glowed a dull gray, as though the sun itself had tired of battling the swirling sheets of white. Inside Daniel's cabin, the three of them formed a small, reluctant family circle. Jacob slept curled up in a worn armchair, arms wrapped around his stuffed dog, oblivious to the adult tensions filling the space. Daniel watched Emily quietly from his perch near the window. She'd drifted toward the fireplace again, where a stack of logs stood ready. Her delicate fingers traced one of the larger pieces of wood, as though she were trying to ground herself in the rough texture. Seeing her in the full light of day, Daniel could better note the shadows under her eyes and the subtle lines in her forehead that hinted at years of worry. She was younger than he was, probably in her early 30s, but something about her posture spoke of a burden carried for too long. He cleared his throat. "I'm going to see if the generator in the back shed still works, in case the power goes out. The lines can be unreliable in storms like this." She gave a half nod, half smile. "I can check on Jacob. Maybe find some lunch." Daniel nodded, and Emily moved gently to the kitchen. He paused, glancing at Jacob's small form, wishing he could ask the child how everything fit together, yet not daring to disturb the boy's rest. Slipping on a heavy coat, Daniel opened the back door. Instantly, an icy wind lashed at his face, snow swirling up his legs. He stepped outside anyway, boots sinking until the drifts reached his shins. The air smelled sharp, crackling with the kind of brittle cold that chills down to bone. The back shed stood about 30 yards away. Under normal conditions, it was a quick walk across a patch of grass. Now, however, each step felt like trekking through quicksand made of ice. By the time he finally reached the sagging door, his breath came in short, steaming bursts. Inside, darkness reigned. He fumbled for the cord of a single overhead bulb and tugged. The light flickered a few times, then glowed faintly. Tools hung from nails on the walls, a hammer, rusted saws, coils of rope. Cobwebs draped every corner. In the far back stood the generator, a hulking shape covered by a dusty tarp. He pulled the cover off, coughing as dust and who knows what flew up in protest. It took him a few tries to open the generator's panel, his gloved hands slipping on the catch. Once he managed it, he knelt and checked the gas lines. They were surprisingly intact. Perhaps the caretaker had done a final inspection last summer. Daniel flicked a switch, listening for the hum of the motor. Nothing. He cursed under his breath, tapping at the old metal frame. On a second attempt, the generator coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life, the sound echoing in the small shed. Daniel's exhale of relief fogged the air. At least if the storm took the power lines down, they wouldn't be left in total darkness. He let it idle a moment, satisfied with the healthy rumble. Then he shut it off and rose, stepping carefully around a few wooden crates. As he did, his phone, tucked in his jacket pocket, buzzed faintly. The screen showed a single bar of reception. Heart jolting, he thumbed to open it. 3 urgent notifications from his corporate office. The legal department needed his final sign-off on a contract. Another message from an unknown number had no content, just static, perhaps the storm interfering. He tried to reply, but the signal dropped again, leaving him in near silence. A swirl of guilt attacked him. Ordinarily, a multi-billion-dollar acquisition would hold his complete attention. Now, though, he found himself consumed by the presence of Emily and the child. Even alone in the shed, he couldn't shake that sense of something vital lying just beyond his reach. He forced himself to focus, typed a quick text. Weathered in, delay sign-off until further notice, and then pocketed the phone. With a final glance around, he stepped back out into the relentless storm. When Daniel re-entered the cabin, he was greeted by a far more homely scene than he was used to. Emily had opened a few cupboards in the kitchen and found a can of soup, some crackers, even a packet of instant mashed potatoes. The small table was set with mismatched bowls, old cabin staples Daniel rarely used. Jacob was awake, rubbing his eyes, and brightened when he saw Daniel come in. "I helped stir the soup," Jacob announced, looking proud. "You did?" Daniel asked, forcing a warm smile. He stamped the snow off his boots and hung his coat on a wall hook. "Well, I'll have to try some. Bet it's top-notch." A fleeting expression flickered in Emily's eyes, something like gratitude or maybe relief. She gestured for him to sit down. Jacob bounced on the balls of his feet, eager for praise. Daniel settled at the table, and Emily ladled the soup, tomato from the smell, into a bowl for him. Jacob reached for the crackers, almost spilling them across the table in his excitement. The domesticity of it all struck Daniel in a disorienting rush. He had eaten countless business lunches in penthouse restaurants, dinners served under starched napkins at exclusive clubs, but none of those polished meals felt as quietly significant as this moment. They began to eat, the warmth of the soup combating the chill that still clung to Daniel's skin. For a moment, no one spoke. The small space echoed only with the sound of spoons clinking against bowls. Finally, Jacob broke the silence, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Mommy says we can't leave yet," he announced solemnly. "Is it because the snow is too high?" Daniel nodded, carefully swallowing a spoonful. "Yes, exactly. The snow's blocking the roads. We have to wait until a plow comes, or until it melts enough that we can drive again." Jacob made a small O with his mouth, considering this. Then his gaze traveled between Daniel and his mother. "But we'll be safe?" Emily reached over to squeeze Jacob's hand reassuringly. "We'll be safe," she said firmly, though her eyes flickered with an emotion Daniel couldn't quite name. "Mr. Kensington has been very kind to let us stay." "That's my job, being kind," Daniel murmured, half to himself. Emily raised an eyebrow, a hint of a smile ghosting her lips. He cleared his throat. I'm just being human. It's not really a job." He cut himself off, a faint flush creeping to his cheeks. Dealing with a mother and her child felt so far from his usual skill set that he was babbling. Jacob giggled. "You sound funny." Emily flashed Daniel a gentle look as if to say, "It's okay." Then she resumed a neutral expression. "So you mentioned you come up here to, do business deals? That must mean you have a big job in the city?" He nodded. "I run a corporation, Kensington International. We handle a lot of real estate investments, mergers, acquisitions." "It's complicated," he said, catching the child's eye. "Let's say we buy and sell parts of big companies. That's the simpler version?" She sipped her soup. "That sounds important." Her voice was careful, as though she was avoiding revealing anything. "Must keep you busy." "It does." He hesitated, swirling the spoon. "But it can get lonely, too. You know, I come out here sometimes because I like the quiet, though I wasn't expecting to meet anyone else during this storm." Her gaze dropped. "Lonely," she repeated softly, almost under her breath. An invisible cord tugged between them. Daniel found himself about to ask a personal question. "How do you manage on your own with your son?" When suddenly, there was a soft clatter. Jacob had finished his soup and nearly upset the empty bowl in his excitement to show Daniel his stuffed dog. "This is Buddy," the boy declared, holding up the bedraggled toy. "He's missing an eye, but Mommy says she can fix it if we find a button." Daniel smiled. "Buddy, huh? Did you name him?" Jacob nodded enthusiastically. "When I was little," he said with all the solemnity of a child who believes 5 years old is ancient history, "Mommy sewed him for me, but the button fell off." A wave of something passed through Daniel. Recognition? Nostalgia? The mention of sewing, perhaps? He remembered a time long ago when he'd known someone adept with a needle. That person had fixed a tear in his own shirt during a frantic exam week. He squeezed his eyes shut briefly, pushing the recollection away. Emily's posture stiffened, as though aware Daniel might piece together fragments of her life. Quickly, she reached to gather the bowls, her cheeks faintly pink. "Jacob, can you help me clean up?" He hopped down, eager to please. Together they carried dishes to the sink. Daniel stood, wanting to help, but the small space was already crowded with two, so he lingered by the table, watching. Jacob chattered about something from his old preschool, something about a class project, and Emily nodded along, humming a motherly, distracted response. Then her gaze snagged on Daniel, and for an instant he saw a flicker of what might have been guilt. She turned away, rinsing the bowls. Soon enough, the lunch cleanup was done. "Why don't you play with Buddy in the living room?" Emily suggested gently to Jacob. "I need to talk to Mr. Kensington about some grown-up stuff." The little boy cast a curious glance at them, as children do when they suspect secrets. But eventually he nodded, hugging his toy and wandering back to the armchair by the fireplace. Emily dried her hands, set the dishcloth aside, and looked at Daniel squarely. Could we sit?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Sure." He followed her to the far side of the kitchen, near the window that overlooked the side yard. The glass was fogged with frost, but enough light spilled through to illuminate their faces. Emily pressed her back against the wall, arms folded. "I think it would be good for us to talk, Daniel." The way she said his first name held a note of familiarity that startled him. But then again, they'd been under the same roof for nearly a full day, sharing food and warmth. It was bound to happen. He nodded slowly. "I agree. We are, after all, in this storm together. And I'd like to know more about how you ended up here. I realize you told me your car got stuck, but something tells me there's more to the story." She blew out a breath. "You're right. There is." A short pause. She glanced toward the living room to ensure Jacob was out of earshot, then lowered her voice. "I recognized you the moment you opened the door last night, Daniel. It took me a minute, but then it hit me like a sledgehammer." His pulse lurched. "Recognized me from where?" "College," she said simply, her eyes darting to the side. "We were both at Harrington University, different majors, but you dated my roommate for a short time. Plus we had a few business elective classes in common. And then one day, we ended up talking. It was after finals, senior year." Her voice grew thick, as though memories pulled at her. Daniel's heart hammered in his chest. Harrington University was indeed his alma mater, but so many faces and acquaintances had blurred across those 4 years. Yet hearing her speak about it unlocked an old corridor in his mind. He pictured campus lawns, the stone courtyard, a bustling library. He tried to recall Emily's face among the crowd. "Emily," he said slowly, testing the name on his tongue. She nodded, understanding the swirl of confusion on his face. "Emily Carter back then. Different last name, obviously." She forced a shaky smile. "You probably don't remember me well. We barely crossed paths." He frowned, trying to piece it together. A memory of warm laughter, a group of them in the cafeteria cramming for an exam. The image was fuzzy, though. The woman in his recollection had been bright-eyed, witty. Maybe I do." "Vaguely," he admitted. "After graduation," Emily continued, "you were set to move to the city and start your big career. I left school abruptly." Her voice cracked. "I got an offer that fell through, then some family issues. Everything changed very quickly." Daniel's forehead creased with concern. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "That must have been hard. But why didn't you—" He caught himself. Why should she have done anything? They were never close friends. Emily stared out at the swirling snow, eyes distant. "You're probably wondering how I ended up on your doorstep. Honestly, I didn't even know this cabin belonged to you. All I knew was that my car slid off a back road and that the nearest light I saw in this blizzard was through your window." Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. "When you opened the door, I recognized you instantly, I pretended not to because I wasn't ready to talk." He let that revelation sink in, uncertain whether to be relieved or unsettled. "So you're saying it's a coincidence? You had no idea I owned this place?" She nodded vigorously, tears brimming in her eyes. "Yes, a complete coincidence. I guess life has a cruel sense of irony." Silence fell, thick and charged. Daniel's mind reeled with new possibilities. "So you and we were never close," he ventured, "but we did cross paths. Why does that matter so much now?" Her eyes flicked to Jacob, who was sitting with his stuffed dog, oblivious. Then she turned her gaze back to Daniel, searching his face. She seemed on the brink of saying something monumental, something that might shatter his sense of reality. But at the last moment she hesitated, visibly torn. "It matters," she began softly, voice trembling, "because I left Harrington carrying a secret that changed everything for me. I didn't know how to tell you then, and by the time I worked up the courage, you were already rising in your new career, unreachable." Daniel's pulse throbbed, a slow, thunderous beat. "Emily, what are you saying?" She pressed her lips together, tears threatening to fall. "Jacob," she whispered, glancing toward the boy. "He's yours, Daniel. He's your son." The moment froze. The flicker of the fireplace seemed to slow. The howling wind dulled to a faint roar in the distance, and Daniel's breath caught in his lungs. All the puzzle pieces snapped into place at once. The child's eyes, that sense of familiarity, Emily's guarded tension. He wanted to speak, but no words came. His gaze flicked from Emily's tear-filled eyes to the small boy in the next room. It was as though everything he knew, his carefully structured world, his well-defined future, tilted on its axis. Emily, Jacob, a secret family he never even knew existed. Tears finally spilled down Emily's cheeks. I wrote letters but never sent them. I was scared you wouldn't believe me or that you'd think I was trying to trap you. Then I lost your direct contact. Your official addresses were offices, not homes. Eventually, I just gave up." She hung her head. "But none of that matters now because here we are, face to face." Daniel's hands trembled at his sides. He took a step back, leaning against the wall for support, his mind surging with questions and anger, though not at Emily, but at the monstrous twist of fate. He closed his eyes, inhaling raggedly. "My son," he repeated in a whisper, as if testing out the words. Emily nodded, fresh tears glistening. "Yes." A hush stretched between them, so thick it was almost suffocating. Daniel wrestled with a surge of emotions: shock, betrayal that no one had told him sooner, regret for never realizing something was missing from his life, and beneath it all, a strange, overwhelming tenderness. That little boy in the living room, the one who so trustingly shared soup with him, if Emily was telling the truth, then he was a father. Thunder rolled in the distance, or perhaps it was just the wind pounding the cabin. In the living room, Jacob giggled at some private imagination, his small voice echoing in the hush. That sound was no longer just that of a stranger's child. It was his child, flesh and blood. Daniel opened his eyes, fixing Emily with a gaze that blazed with questions. His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. "We need to talk. We need to figure this out, but first, I need to see him. Properly talk to him. If he's my—" He trailed off, unable to form the last word. Emily wiped her cheeks and nodded, chest rising with a shaky sigh. "Of course. We'll talk, Daniel. We'll tell him, gently, in time. But for now, let's just take this one step at a time." He swallowed hard, turning his head toward Jacob's small silhouette by the flickering firelight. "One step at a time," he repeated, though he couldn't ignore the frantic thunder of his heartbeat. The storm outside seemed almost trivial compared to the tempest raging inside him. Snow drifted in soft, swirling gusts across the frosted window panes, but the storm inside Daniel's chest felt far more powerful. He had retreated to the far side of the living room, leaning against a tall bookshelf. Emily stood near the kitchen, wiping at her damp cheeks, and Jacob remained in the armchair, completely unaware that his entire world had shifted with a single revelation. Daniel's mind pulsed with a chaotic medley of anger, confusion, and wonder. How had he gone so long without knowing he had a son? The boy was already talking in full sentences, old enough to giggle at cartoons and stir soup in a pot. So many milestones Daniel had missed. He pressed a trembling hand over his face, struggling to steady the frantic beat of his heart. Across the room, Emily caught his eye, her expression both apologetic and fiercely protective. She was the same woman who had arrived the night before, looking exhausted and desperate in the middle of a snowstorm. Yet now he saw her with new clarity. He saw the single mother who had navigated unthinkable challenges without him, who had raised Jacob alone, who had secrets and regrets Daniel had never even fathomed. Needing a breather, he paced toward the dining nook, grabbing onto a chair for support. He heard Emily follow him but remain at a slight distance. The hush in the cabin pressed in on them, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the faint hum of the heating vents. I don't know where to begin," Daniel whispered, forcing each word through parched lips. Emily cleared her throat, voice quiet. "I understand," she said. "It's a lot to take in. It was for me, too, back then." Her words struck him with a bolt of empathy. Back then must have been a lonely, frightening time for her, discovering a pregnancy after graduation, unsure how to proceed, possibly with no stable support. Guilt rose like a tidal wave within him. Had she tried to reach him in some way he never recognized? He shook his head, questions tumbling out before he could stop them. When did you realize you were pregnant?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder to ensure Jacob was still safely occupied in his imaginary play with that stuffed dog. Emily folded her arms across her middle, as though she needed to hold herself together. "We had that study group for Professor Adams' final," she began, nostalgia flickering in her eyes. "One night after we finished, you and I talked outside the library. It was raining. You walked me back to my dorm. We said we'd keep in touch over the summer." She paused, words catching. "But life got messy. I left campus almost immediately after exams because my grandmother got sick, and I never came back for graduation. By the time I put two and two together, you were already gone. I didn't have your phone number, only a campus extension that didn't work once you'd moved." Daniel frowned. He remembered that last month at Harrington vaguely. It had been a whirlwind of job interviews and forging corporate connections. He'd flown out to meet prospective mentors, stayed in fancy hotels, never returning to campus beyond picking up his diploma. That insane schedule had left him no room to consider what might be unfolding in someone else's life. "I'm sorry," he murmured, not knowing what else to say. "Me too," Emily said, her voice taut. "I never planned to keep you away from Jacob. But once you're out in the real world, it's surprisingly difficult to track someone down, especially someone like you on a fast career trajectory changing addresses. And it became easier and easier for me to tell myself that you'd moved on, that you wouldn't want the added responsibility." She sighed, glancing at the child. "By the time I actually had the means to hire a private investigator, somebody who might find you properly, I lost my nerve." Daniel raked a hand through his hair, aware that any number of if-only moments hung between them, intangible yet heavy with regret. He pictured the countless press releases highlighting his company's successes. There had been photos of him in business magazines, even local TV interviews. Emily must have known what he looked like, known how to find a business address, but perhaps she felt it was too large a chasm to cross. From the living room, a sudden giggle erupted. Jacob had discovered a dusty board game near the fireplace. The sound both warmed and pierced Daniel's heart. He struggled to speak through the knot in his throat. "What now?" he asked quietly. "How do we fix this?" Emily's eyes shone with uncertainty, tears threatening again. "Honestly, I never imagined we'd be face to face like this. There are 1,000 things I wish I'd done differently." She cast a quick look at Jacob. "But I guess the question is whether you want to be part of his life. Because he's not just an obligation, Daniel. He's a boy who's grown up with a certain worldview. If you decide to step in, it won't be easy for him to adjust. Or for you." In that instant, Daniel's defenses crumbled. He remembered how, as a child, he'd longed for a stable father figure, a constant presence who didn't vanish for weeks on end. Jacob had grown up believing he had none. That realization ignited a fierce protectiveness in him, a need to correct the narrative. "Of course I want to be part of his life," he said, voice choking with conviction. "I can't pretend this isn't happening, or that I don't care. He faltered, swallowing a lump of raw emotion. "But how does he feel about a dad? Has he asked? Did you ever tell him anything about me?" A tender sorrow touched Emily's face. "He's asked about his father sometimes," she admitted, tone hushed. "I told him very general things, that his dad was someone I knew in college, that we lost contact. I made it sound less complicated than it was. He's only recently begun asking bigger questions. Why he doesn't see you? Why you've never come for holidays? I've been running out of excuses." Daniel shut his eyes briefly, the ache in his chest intensifying. How strange that while he was signing merger papers and climbing the corporate ladder, a small boy was at home wondering why his father never appeared. He had no words to describe the swirl of regret and protectiveness that thrummed in his veins. Footsteps stirred behind them. Jacob came bounding over, board game in hand, Buddy the stuffed dog tucked under his arm. "Mommy, can we play this?" he asked eagerly, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension. Then he glanced up at Daniel. "Will you play too, Mr. Kensington?" Daniel blinked back, burning tears. "Sure," he managed, forcing a small smile. "But I think maybe you can call me Daniel if that's okay with your mom." Jacob broke into a grin and nodded at Emily, who nodded back, pressing her lips together. The boy began to set up the pieces on the floor, humming softly. Emily mouthed, "We'll talk more later," to Daniel, who gave a slight nod of understanding. He crouched down next to Jacob, scanning the game's worn board. Though his mind still churned with the knowledge that this child was his son, he tried to focus on the present moment, Jacob's wide, animated eyes and the sheer excitement in his voice. They sat together in a makeshift circle on the wooden floor, Emily on one side, Daniel on the other, with Jacob bouncing in the middle. The game was an old classic with colored pawns and a spinner. Daniel remembered playing it as a boy, but he never imagined he'd be the adult figure introducing it to the next generation. "See, you spin here," Jacob instructed, pointing to the arrow, "and then you move your guy on the path. If you get to the end first, you win." Daniel nodded, letting the boy go first. His child. The realization thundered through every moment, sending waves of both awe and heartbreak. He glanced over at Emily, whose eyes were fixed on the board. She carefully avoided meeting his gaze. As the afternoon wore on, they played several rounds, with Jacob claiming victory more than once, shrieking with laughter whenever Daniel's pawn landed on a penalty space. The cabin's warmth grew almost stifling, though Daniel suspected it was more his internal turmoil than the actual temperature. Through it all, he noticed how easily Jacob's laughter filled the space, how naturally the boy seemed to accept Daniel's presence. Unaware of the deeper revelations that hovered, unaware that the man who balanced the spinner on his knee and teased him about cheating was the same person he had yearned to meet his entire young life. When the game concluded, Emily stood, stretching. "Let's see if we can scrape together dinner," she suggested, her tone subdued. "I'll check if we have enough pasta, maybe some canned sauce." Jacob hopped up, bounding after her. Daniel rose more slowly, taking the board in hand and returning it to its dusty shelf. The storm beyond the windows was relentless, swirling white against the darkening sky. It was as though the outside world was locked away and the three of them were suspended in a fragile bubble of temporary peace. He drifted into the kitchen area. Emily was rooting around in the cupboards. "If you want to help, you could chop some vegetables," she offered softly. "I found onions and a potato or two that aren't too far gone." "Sure," Daniel replied, eager for a distraction from the swirling questions in his head. They worked side by side in near silence, her rinsing the vegetables in the sink, him carefully slicing on a cutting board. From time to time, she shot him a shy, apologetic glance. Once, their hands brushed, and a quiver of tension passed between them. Jacob, for his part, sat at the table, swinging his legs, apparently satisfied from the board game triumph. He began telling them about a story he'd heard in preschool, something about a talking frog that found magical boots. Daniel only half listened, though he managed a nod here and there. He was too busy fighting the realization that every slice of onion, every wave of steam from the pot, every mundane task was happening in a context he never foresaw, cooking dinner with a woman he once knew while their son played in the background. Once the water boiled for pasta, Emily set the noodles to cook. The aroma of onions sizzling in a pan laced with butter drifted through the small cabin. Had Daniel been in a clearer mental state, he might have marveled at the cozy domesticity. Instead, a quiet storm raged within him, echoing the blizzard outside. At last, dinner was ready. They gathered at the table again, this time with a slightly more purposeful arrangement. Emily placed Jacob in the middle, then hesitated, letting Daniel choose which seat to take. He ended up opposite her, so they formed a triangle. The boy happily dug into the pasta and sauce, while the adults ate more slowly, glancing up occasionally to meet each other's eyes, only to look away a moment later. Daniel cleared his throat. "Jacob," he ventured gently, "tell me about your school. You said preschool?" The child perked up, mouth ringed with tomato sauce. "Yeah, it's fun. We do coloring and sometimes we learn songs. Mommy picks me up after work." That mention of after work filled Daniel with more curiosity. "What do you do?" he asked Emily, trying to keep his voice steady. "If you don't mind me asking." She dabbed her mouth with a napkin. "I'm a freelancer mostly. I do seamstress work, alterations for a local boutique, sometimes custom dresses for special orders. I also pick up odd jobs at events like catering or hosting." A shadow flickered across her features. "It's not easy, but I manage. Jacob is my priority." Daniel's heart clenched. He remembered that she'd once studied marketing or something related to communications. Life must have gone in a very different direction. He didn't blame her. College alone was stressful enough without an unplanned pregnancy. "I see," he murmured, wishing he could rectify the struggles she must have faced, though uncertain how. The paternal urge within him cried out to fix everything, to open his wallet, to provide every resource. But the rational side hesitated, knowing it was too soon to barge into her carefully built life with a ready-made solution. Dinner concluded in awkward half-sentences and forced smiles. Afterward, Jacob yawned theatrically, mentioning how he was sleepy from the big meal and all the excitement. Emily guided him to the bedroom, tucking him in. Daniel lingered in the living room, cleaning up the dishes to give them privacy. All the while, his mind churned with 1,000 questions. Would Jacob resent him once he knew the full truth? Would Emily be open to Daniel taking a role in his son's life now? Could they navigate this new terrain without ripping each other apart? By the time Emily returned to the living room, the fire had died to embers, and the overhead lights cast a soft glow. She approached Daniel hesitantly. "He's asleep," she said, folding her arms. "He had a big day. He's out cold." Daniel studied her face, noticing the exhaustion etched into her features. "Emily, thank you for telling me," he began, voice hushed. "I know it couldn't have been easy." She gave a shaky nod, tears swimming in her eyes once again. "It's not ideal how you found out. None of this is how I imagined it, but we're here now." She swallowed thickly. "I guess the next question is, what you want to do?" He stared at her, torn between a flood of paternal instinct and the practical fear that he was too late to make a difference. "I want to be in his life," he said, tone firm. "I don't know how exactly, but I can't just walk away from him, from you." She smiled sadly. "I hope we can figure that out together." The gentle hum of the heater filled the silence. Daniel turned toward the window, where the swirl of white was gradually darkening in the twilight. Trapped in this cabin by the storm, it was as though fate had given them a forced pause, a moment to confront everything they'd been avoiding for years. Emily reached for his arm tentatively. The warmth of her fingers against his sweater made him tense. "We'll talk more in the morning," she said softly, her voice trembling. "For now, try to rest, okay?" He nodded, numb, and watched as she headed toward the bedroom, quietly shutting the door behind her. He was alone then, alone with the knowledge that just a few feet away slept a child who carried his blood, his name left unspoken for years. And in the adjacent room lay a woman who bore secrets he was only beginning to unravel. The storm raged outside, wind howling as it battered the windows. Daniel sank onto the sofa, head in his hands. Sleep wouldn't come easily tonight. Far too much was at stake. He leaned back eventually, letting the flicker of the dying fire lull him into a fitful doze. And in that restless haze between wakefulness and sleep, he saw images of the life he never knew. Jacob learning to walk, Emily humming lullabies, 1,000 moments that had slipped through his fingers like grains of sand. Tomorrow would bring fresh conversations, uncertain steps toward shaping a new reality. But for now, the storm kept them confined in this isolated haven where revelations had already shattered the veneer of Daniel's controlled existence and would surely continue to reshape it by the morning's light. Night descended upon the cabin with a hush that amplified every small sound. The wind outside still lashed against the walls, but something in the storm's rhythm had changed, less ferocious and more rhythmic, like an endless sigh. Inside, the lights were dim, the glow from a single lamp pooling across the living room floor and stretching shadows across old wooden beams. Daniel woke after a fitful doze on the sofa, thoughts still spinning with the revelations of the day. His neck ached from sleeping upright, and the small fire he'd left flickering earlier had crumbled to ash, leaving the room chilly. Rubbing his eyes, he reached for the throw blanket tangled at his feet, uncertain how long he'd slept. His watch read just past midnight. Despite the late hour, he was restless, heart pounding with unresolved questions. Without fully deciding why, Daniel rose from the couch and padded quietly through the living room. He headed for the corner of the cabin where the tall bookshelf stood, the same shelf that had first caught Emily's attention when she arrived. On an upper shelf was that old college photograph he'd all but forgotten until her reaction last night. He pulled the frame down, blowing away a thin film of dust. The photo captured a group from Harrington University, smiling in a courtyard. There he was, young, confident, wearing a grin that hinted at boundless ambition. Just to his left, partially hidden by a friend's raised arm, was a woman with long hair, bright eyes, and a wide smile. He squinted. Could that be Emily standing next to that roommate he'd briefly dated all those years ago? He stared at it so intently that the rest of the room seemed to fade. Memories from that period swirled. Late-night cram sessions in the library, campus events, after-parties, final exams. And somehow, amid all that chaos, he and Emily had shared a few quiet conversations. Moments he'd discounted as fleeting acquaintances. Now he felt the weight of those overlooked moments all too sharply. A gentle creak startled him, and he looked up to see Emily emerging from the hallway. She wore a robe over the borrowed sweater, her hair pulled into a messy bun. The light from the small lamp illuminated the tired hollows under her eyes. "I heard movement," she said softly. "Jacob woke me up to get some water, and I noticed you weren't sleeping. Everything okay?" Daniel set the photo down, exhaling. "Yes. No. I'm not sure," he admitted, voice hushed. "I guess I can't sleep, and I keep thinking about everything we talked about." She nodded slowly, stepping closer. "Me too." For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The faint howling wind underscored the fragile quiet. Then Emily glanced at the photo in Daniel's hands. "I remember that day," she murmured. "There was some campus charity event. You were with your roommate, John, I think, and I was just tagging along with my friend." A wry smile tugged at her lips. "You were so confident, but I remember noticing that you kept checking your phone for messages about an internship. I thought you were too important for the rest of us." Daniel managed a humorless laugh. "I was ambitious, yes, maybe too much so. I didn't look around me enough to see what was happening, or who was right there in front of me." Her expression grew solemn. "Neither did I," she said. "Everything happened so fast. I look back now and wish I had told you the news immediately or at least tried harder to reach you, but fear can be paralyzing." He returned the photograph to the shelf with care. "You said you lost your nerve," he recalled. "Can I ask why?" For a beat she hesitated, pressing her lips together. "At first I was terrified. You were this unstoppable force, going straight into high-powered business. My family was struggling, my grandmother was ill and later passed away. I was juggling jobs, then found out I was pregnant. I thought, what if you rejected me outright? Or blamed me for trying to derail your career? What if you decided you wanted full custody once you had the resources?" She swallowed hard. I couldn't handle the possibility. So I told myself I would find my footing first. But time slipped by, and I never did." Daniel nodded, the ache in his chest intensifying. He'd never considered how terrifying it must have been for her. In the glare of his own ambitions, he might have brushed aside such news back then. "I'm not proud," he muttered. "There was a time when I would have thrown money at any problem and walked away. But not now. Now I see how much I missed." Emily's eyes flickered with emotion. "We both missed a lot," she whispered. "But you can still know him, Daniel. We can figure out how to co-parent in some way. Jacob's young. He can adapt if we do this carefully." The thought of stepping into a fatherly role both excited and terrified him. "I have so many questions," he admitted. "About him, about you, about how we proceed. But maybe it's best if we sort through them one at a time. Tomorrow I'd like to spend more time with him if that's okay." She nodded. "Of course. He's bright, curious, and more perceptive than I sometimes realize. He'll warm to you fast. Actually, I think he already has." A soft laugh escaped. "He was bragging about how you played that board game with him, saying, 'Daniel didn't even know the rules, but I taught him.'" Daniel felt a faint smile stretch across his face. It was a small anecdote, but it felt monumental, a glimpse into what fatherhood might look like. "I liked playing with him. Never thought I'd see the day I'd be bested by a preschooler in a board game," he teased, trying to lighten the heavy mood. They shared a brief laugh that ended with a hush, as though neither wanted to wake the child down the hall. Emily looked at the dying embers in the hearth. "Do you want me to stoke the fire, or should we just let it go out? It's late." He shrugged. "Let it go. The heater's still running. Tomorrow, if the storm calms, I can shovel a path and see if the generator is still good to use. We can talk about our next steps then." Silence settled, but it was a more companionable hush than before. Emily hovered, arms folded, as though bracing for cold. "We should try to get some sleep," she said gently. "We'll think more clearly in the morning." Daniel nodded, though he doubted his mind would quiet enough for true rest. Before she could leave, he cleared his throat. "Emily, thank you for telling me the truth, for not letting me remain in ignorance." Her gaze flicked to his, tears glinting in the lamplight. "You're welcome," she breathed. "I know it's overwhelming. Just promise me you won't vanish on us. I don't think Jacob could handle that." The desperate plea in her voice twisted his heart. "I promise," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm here now." She exhaled, relief evident on her face. Then, with a last parting glance, she retreated to the bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. The faint click echoed in the stillness. Daniel lingered by the bookshelf a moment longer, attention returning to that old photograph. In it, the younger version of himself looked self-assured, while the crowd around him cheered some event. The boy in the next room, Jacob, was the unexpected chapter that Daniel's college self never imagined would be written, and Emily was the key to all of it. Eventually, he moved back to the sofa, lying down with a sigh. His mind still whirred, but exhaustion tugged at him, leading him into fragmented dreams. He saw flashes of Jacob's laughter, the softness in Emily's voice, the swirl of snow outside. Then memory bled into fantasy, and he dreamt of a future where the three of them walked hand in hand through a sunny park. A future that might be possible if he navigated this fragile situation with care. Morning arrived in a veil of silence. The storm had weakened, leaving thick mounds of snow banked against the cabin walls, but no longer pouring down in furious gusts. Pale winter sunlight broke through the edges of the curtains. Daniel stirred on the couch, blinking at the brightness. He sat up slowly, rolling his neck to ease the stiffness. A quick glance at the window confirmed that the blizzard's worst fury had passed. Though the forest beyond was buried in white, the howling winds had calmed to a gentle breeze that ruffled the pine trees. The morning felt almost peaceful. From down the hall came the sound of muffled voices, Jacob and Emily, presumably. Daniel brushed a hand through his hair and decided to freshen up before facing the day. In the small bathroom, he splashed cold water on his face. He caught sight of his reflection in the mirror, noticing how haunted his eyes looked. An entire day had transformed his perspective on life. He breathed, forcing composure. When he stepped back into the living area, he spotted Jacob in the kitchenette, arms flung wide as he tried to peer out the window. Emily looked on, smiling. The child turned around, noticing Daniel. "Daniel!" Jacob greeted cheerily. "It snowed a lot. Like, a lot." Daniel couldn't help but smile back at the boy's excitement. "It sure did," he said. "How'd you sleep?" Jacob shrugged in that loose, innocent way children do. "Good. Mommy read me a story and I didn't even wake up once." Then, eyes wide, he pointed to the window. "Can we go play in it? Please?" Emily looked uncertain. "Well, honey, it's still pretty deep, and we don't have proper snow gear. I wouldn't want you to get soaked." The child's face fell momentarily, then brightened again. "But we can at least look. We can see how high it is." Daniel fought the urge to laugh. Everything about Jacob's earnestness felt so new and precious. He cleared his throat. "I was planning to shovel a path," he said, glancing at Emily. "We need to see if we can clear the door and maybe get to your car, or at least figure out how to call a tow truck. That'll give Jacob a chance to step outside for a minute if you want." Her gaze met his. "You're sure you don't mind? It'll be a lot of shoveling." He shrugged. "I actually look forward to it," he admitted, surprising even himself. "Maybe some manual labor will help me think straight." Emily nodded, a small, grateful smile curving her lips. "All right, I'll help you find the shovel. Jacob, you'll have to stay close to the door, okay? We'll let you stomp around for a second, but no wandering off." Jacob, satisfied with the plan, bobbed his head enthusiastically. They ate a quick breakfast of cereal and fruit, whatever remained in the cabin's sparse pantry, before bundling up. Emily borrowed a heavier coat from a closet, and Daniel handed over his thickest scarf for Jacob to wrap around his neck, though it nearly swallowed the boy's entire face. The trio approached the front door, which, when opened, revealed a waist-high drift of snow that spilled inward onto the threshold. "Whoa," Jacob gasped, eyes round as saucers. Even Emily's jaw dropped a fraction at the sight. Daniel chuckled, stepping forward. "Stand back," he instructed gently. He grabbed the large snow shovel from the corner and started pushing the drift aside in broad scoops. Each movement was slow-going. He'd lift, toss a mound of snow, then repeat, forging a path from the doorway. Jacob hopped in place, marveling at the frosty piles. Emily hovered behind the child, adjusting his scarf. Despite the cold stinging Daniel's cheeks, he felt an unexpected warmth in his chest. The domestic scene, him clearing snow while they watched, felt more surreal than any corporate deal he'd finalized. He carved a narrow walkway around to the side of the cabin where a wooden porch stood half-buried. The air was crisp and pure, pine-scented and bracing. Sweat beaded under his coat from the effort, yet it felt oddly cathartic. Each scoop of snow seemed to ease some of the tangled tension in his mind. At one point, Daniel paused, breathing heavily, the shovel's handle clenched in gloved hands. He looked back toward Emily and Jacob. The boy was gingerly stepping onto the cleared path, letting out a squeal whenever he sank knee-deep. Emily laughed softly, reminding him not to go too far. It was such a simple, carefree moment, the sort of memory Daniel realized he'd never had with his own father. A pang of loss and resolve flooded him simultaneously. He wouldn't let Jacob grow up with that same hollow space. Continuing around to the side driveway, Daniel found Emily's car half submerged in a snowbank. The angle made it clear the vehicle had swerved off the narrow road and ended up hugging a tall pine. He winced, suspecting the undercarriage might be damaged. When he finally returned, he found Emily beside the porch, stamping her boots to keep warm. Jacob was giggling uncontrollably, explaining how his feet felt like ice bricks. She gave Daniel a hopeful glance. "Any luck with the car?" He set the shovel aside, leaning it against the cabin wall. "It's definitely stuck. Might need a tow, maybe even repairs. The good news is the storm's passed, so if we can reach a phone signal, we'll call for help. The main road might still be closed, though." Emily exhaled, shoulders sagging. "I was afraid of that." Jacob tugged on Daniel's coat. "Can we go back inside now? I can't feel my toes." Daniel bent down to brush snow off the child's coat with a grin. "Sure thing, buddy. Let's warm up." He realized as he pulled off his gloves and stepped into the cabin's foyer that he'd called Jacob buddy without even thinking. The boy gave him a big smile, and Daniel's heart swelled, the weight of fatherhood settling in a little more. Once the door was closed, they peeled away coats, scarves, and boots. Emily gently checked Jacob's socks, shaking her head at how damp they were. "Let's get you in some dry clothes right away," she said, ushering him toward the bedroom with the promise of hot cocoa soon. Daniel took a moment to stomp off excess snow from his boots before setting them by the door. The chill in the air made his ears burn, but inside the heater's hum offered comfort. He moved to the living room, noticing how the space felt smaller now that his perspective had shifted, like a family cabin instead of a lone corporate retreat. A minute later, Emily emerged alone, arms folded against the cold. "He's changing," she said. "Thanks for letting him walk outside. He loved that." Daniel bobbed his head in acknowledgement. The swirl of earlier revelations hung between them, but they both seemed determined to keep the atmosphere hopeful. "Any signal on your phone?" he asked. She shook her head, lips pursed. "No, I checked. How about yours?" He took it out, tapping the screen. "Still nothing," he muttered, voice tinged with frustration. "But the storm's gone, so maybe if I walk a bit up the road I can find a bar or two. I'll call a tow truck. Also, I'd like to check in with my office. They must be wondering why I've gone dark." Emily's gaze flickered with curiosity, as if to say, "Yes, your entire corporate empire is waiting," but she didn't voice it. Instead, she said, We can try it together if you want. I'll watch Jacob while you step up the road, but please be careful. The snow is deep." He grimaced. "I will. Actually, maybe I'll go alone. Jacob can stay warm in here with you. No need for him to trek out there. Let's see if I can find a patch of signal. It might be a short walk or it might be a half-mile." They agreed. Daniel pulled on his gear once more, bracing himself for the cold. Emily stood by, hugging her arms, a worried pinch to her brow. "I'll keep the fire going," she told him. "Don't wander too far if you can't see where you're stepping." "I'll be back soon," he promised, trying to project confidence. At the door, he hesitated, casting a glance toward the bedroom door where Jacob was presumably changing. If he asks about me," Daniel said quietly, "just tell him I'm trying to fix the car situation, okay?" She nodded, understanding the subtext. Of course. With that, Daniel trudged out into the morning light, forging a path through the deep drifts that lined the cabin's main driveway. The sun peeked from behind scattered clouds, turning the snow into a glittering sea of white. The air felt crisp against his lungs, each breath a small cloud of steam. As he walked, he mulled over everything that had transpired. The confession, the board game, the snow shoveling. He had lived decades chasing success, sure that fatherhood and family life would only slow him down. Now, faced with fatherhood anyway, he realized how shallow those assumptions had been. He paused on a slight rise in the road, glancing back at the cabin's roof peeking from behind tall pines. A swirl of warmth bloomed in his chest at the thought of Emily and Jacob inside. His family, in some sense, waiting for him to return. It was a thought as exhilarating as it was sobering. When he lifted his phone, a single bar of reception flickered on screen. He felt a rush of relief and quickly tried calling a local tow service. The line rang but didn't connect. After a few attempts, it dropped. Gritting his teeth, he inched further along the road, searching for a better signal. At last, he found a tiny patch where 2 bars appeared. Standing in a small clearing where the wind had blown some snow away, he managed to get through to the tow service's automated system. But by the time he navigated the prompts, the signal dipped again. He hurriedly left a message detailing the address and the type of help needed. With luck, someone would retrieve it soon and come out once the roads were cleared. Next, he tried reaching his office. Voicemail after voicemail. Lack of service cut each attempt short. He left the minimal update. Stuck in a snowstorm, do not finalize the acquisition until further notice. Then his phone beeped with a near-dead battery symbol. Perfect. He sighed, pockets crammed with useless technology, and turned back toward the cabin. Walking back, he found himself strangely elated despite the cold. The sense of finalizing business calls no longer held the same weight. His mind was too full of Jacob's smile, Emily's shy half-laugh, and the promise that he had a chance at something real, something that mattered more than $1 million deal. The morning sun slanted through the trees, coaxing sparks of brilliance from the snow. Daniel squinted, savoring the quiet. In the city, his life was a constant swirl of noise and obligation. Here, in the hush of pine and snow, he felt the stirrings of a deeper purpose. Reaching the cabin's porch, he stomped the snow off his boots again and slipped inside. The warmth enveloped him. He heard soft laughter from the living room. Peeking around the corner, he saw Jacob perched on the sofa, telling Emily an animated story. She noticed Daniel's return and gave him a questioning look. "Did you succeed?" He gave a thumbs up of sorts, mouthing, "I left a message." Jacob bounced off the couch, bounding over. "Did you see any big deer?" "Mommy says there are deer in these woods." "No deer yet," Daniel said, crouching to meet the boy's eye level. "But maybe next time we look." Jacob giggled, clearly satisfied with that. Emily approached, a trace of relief on her face. "I'm glad you got a message out at least," she said softly. "We'll see if they can come rescue us soon." Daniel nodded, pulling off his gloves. "In the meantime," he said, directing his words to both mother and son, "we can stay warm and figure out a plan. If the plows come, maybe by tomorrow we can head back. Wherever back is for you, Emily. Her expression flickered. I'm between stable addresses right now. My friend's place was supposed to be a short-term arrangement, but we'll sort it out. He paused, heart pounding at the impulse to offer them more. You know, you could come to my place in the city if you need to. Just temporarily. He added quickly, aware this was a big suggestion. Until you find something more permanent. I mean, you said yourself you're not sure about your next step. And I want to spend time with Jacob, really spend time with him. Emily's eyes widened with surprise. Jacob glanced up, not fully understanding, but picked up on the tension. Silence thickened. Daniel braced himself for a refusal, a million reasons why it might be a bad idea. But he also saw the exhaustion in Emily's posture, the weariness of a single mother who had run out of options. She swallowed. Let's see how we feel when the road's clear, she said gently, clearly not ready to commit. Yet there was no outright rejection either. Jacob, sensing the shift, piped up. Will we still be together? He asked innocently, eyes darting between them. Daniel and Emily exchanged a charged look. Slowly Daniel leaned forward, ruffling the boy's hair. Yes, he said, voice steady. We're going to figure this out together. In that moment, the hush of the cabin felt different. Not stifled by secrets, but brimming with cautious hope. Outside, the snow glistened under pale sunlight, and inside, the three of them hovered on the cusp of a new beginning. The day unfurled with strange simplicity. Snow shimmered outside, and with no visitors able to reach them, the cabin became its own little universe. While waiting for any sign of the tow truck or the plows, Daniel slipped into a routine he never imagined for himself. Stoking the fire, rummaging through cupboards to see what scraps of food remained, sharing playful banter with Jacob when the boy asked question upon question, like a detective piecing together a father's identity he didn't yet fully understand. Emily, for her part, wore that guarded expression of someone who sees possibility and danger in equal measure. Whenever Daniel caught her gaze, he felt a flutter of concern. Could she really trust him to handle fatherhood after being absent all those years? He wasn't sure he trusted himself. But every time Jacob laughed and beamed up at him, Daniel felt that unexplainable tug in his heart. A sense that fatherhood might be the most important work he'd ever undertake. By mid-afternoon, the forest beyond the windows glowed under a wan, wintry sun. The sky had cleared to a pale, frigid blue, the storm clouds drifting off to the distant hills. Daniel peered out through the front bay window, scanning the road for any sign of movement, but it remained silent and still, a ribbon of white vanishing into the pines. No plow, no vehicles, just occasional bird tracks and the deep hush of fresh snow. With a sigh, he turned back to the living room. Emily was perched on the edge of the sofa, sewing kit in hand, carefully reattaching the missing button eye on Jacob's stuffed dog. Jacob sat cross-legged at her side, transfixed by her nimble fingers. "Mommy's the best sewer," Jacob announced proudly when Daniel returned. "She can fix anything." Daniel chuckled at the child's exuberance. "I see. That's a good skill." He lowered himself onto the armchair, marveling at how domestic the scene was. Emily's face, lit by the soft glow of a nearby lamp, showed intense focus, but she glanced up for an instant, offering him a small smile. "Almost done," Emily murmured to Jacob. A few more stitches and she tied a neat knot, snipping the thread. Then she presented the toy dog with a flourish. "Buddy is back to full vision," she declared. Jacob giggled and hugged the toy. "Thank you." He scrambled off the sofa, bounding to Daniel's side. "See, now he can see everything again." Daniel took a closer look, noting the mismatched buttons. The new one was slightly larger than the other, giving the stuffed dog a quirky charm. "Looks perfect to me," he said, ruffling the boy's hair. Beneath that innocent moment, his heart panged with a mixture of joy and remorse. He was delighted to be sharing these small family routines, yet painfully aware of the many everyday memories he'd already missed. Emily cleared her throat. Should we have a snack? I was thinking we could heat water for some tea or cocoa. The cabin is running low on supplies, but we still have those packets we found. Cocoa! Jacob cheered, running to the kitchen. I'll get the cups. Emily followed, throwing Daniel a backward glance as if checking to see whether he was okay. He mustered a nod, forcing a reassuring smile, though inside a swirl of questions still churned. The day might be calm on the surface, but the undercurrent of potential upheaval was strong. A short while later, they sat around the small dining table, each cradling a mug of hot cocoa. Jacob, with a mischievous grin, insisted on piling extra marshmallows into Daniel's cup, giggling whenever they bobbed at the surface. Emily sipped hers quietly, eyes flicking between Daniel and the child. "How long do you think we'll be stuck here?" Jacob asked at one point, mouth rimmed with chocolate. Daniel shrugged gently. "Hard to say. If the roads are cleared today, maybe tomorrow we can all leave. But if they're still buried, it might take a few more days. For now, we just wait." Jacob considered this, then looked at his mother. "Where will we go after that?" A fleeting tension stole over Emily's face, but she forced a calm tone. "We'll figure that out, sweetie. First, we want to make sure the car's okay. Then we'll see about our next place." He nodded, seemingly placated. But the question echoed in Daniel's mind. Where would they go, indeed? Could they truly accept his offer to stay with him in the city, if only for a little while? It felt like an enormous leap, but leaving them adrift seemed unthinkable. When their mugs were empty, Jacob rushed off to amuse himself with an old coloring book he'd found. That left Emily and Daniel alone at the table, swirling the remnants of cocoa in their cups. The hush between them was both comfortable and charged. "You know," Daniel ventured quietly, "I think Jacob's beginning to wonder why I'm here, like why we're all together under one roof. It's only a matter of time before he asks more direct questions." Emily nodded, her lips twisting into a pained frown. "Yes, he's at that age where curiosity grows every day. I've told him you're a friend who's helping us right now, but—" She trailed off, gaze drifting toward the boy in the next room. Daniel leaned forward, pressing his hands together. "We can't keep him in the dark for long, but it's probably too overwhelming to just blurt out, 'Hey, I'm actually your father,' without preparing him." She sighed. "I agree. Yet if we wait too long, he might feel betrayed that we didn't tell him sooner. It's a delicate balance, and you deserve to—" She paused, voice trembling. "You deserve to have a relationship with him, not overshadowed by secrets." A wave of gratitude and heartache washed over Daniel. "I'd like that," he said softly. "But I don't want to scare him or disrupt everything he's known. We have to proceed gently." She met his gaze, tears glistening. "Yes, gently." They sat there for a few beats, the weight of their unspoken decisions pressing down. Eventually, Daniel cleared his throat. "One day at a time, right?" She nodded. "One day at a time." They were interrupted by the hollow sound of something banging outside. A distant clank. Daniel tensed and Emily's eyes widened. Could that be? They both rose and hurried to the window. Jacob, sensing the excitement, came bounding over. Outside, on the road beyond the cabin's entrance, they glimpsed a large shape moving slowly, a snowplow with flashing lights, trundling through the drifts, carving a path. "Yes!" Jacob cheered, bouncing. "They found us!" Relief flooded Daniel. "Looks like the plows are finally here," he remarked, turning to Emily. "That means we're closer to contact with the outside world. Maybe a tow truck can come soon." Emily exhaled shakily. "Good, because as cozy as this is, we can't stay here forever." Her words held an undercurrent of resolve. She knew there were still so many details to work out, and the real world was about to catch up with them. A half-hour later, the rumble of heavy machinery faded into the distance. Daniel peered out the door to see that the plow had passed on to the next section of road, leaving behind a rough but navigable path. The snow was still high, but at least there was a cleared route that might accommodate a sturdy vehicle. Feeling hopeful, Daniel tried his phone again. This time, the bars flickered between 1 and 2, but it was enough to make a brief call. He managed to reach a local towing service that confirmed they'd be able to send a driver soon now that the main road had been plowed. Within an hour, they promised, someone would be on the way. Jacob overheard and clapped his hands, shouting, "We're saved!" in the manner of a dramatic storybook hero. Emily laughed lightly, though Daniel noticed a flicker of tension in her eyes. The next steps would be complicated. Sure enough, about 40 minutes later, a rumble grew in the distance. Daniel, with coat and boots on, stepped outside to greet a large tow truck that chugged up the newly plowed road, chains rattling over the slush. He waved it down, beckoning the driver to the side yard where Emily's car lay half embedded in a snowdrift. The man who jumped down from the driver's seat introduced himself as Frank, a local with a thick beard and an easygoing demeanor. "Heard you needed a rescue," he said, eyeing the car's predicament. "Let's see what we can do." Daniel watched as Frank maneuvered the truck into position, hooking cables to Emily's battered sedan. He gestured for Emily to stay near the cabin, but she stood on the porch, arms wrapped around herself, watching anxiously. Jacob was inside, peeking through a window with wide eyes. After a few tense minutes of revving and pulling, the car lurched free from the snowbank, wheels scraping over ice as the tow truck eased it onto firmer ground. But the front bumper was bent, and from Daniel's vantage point, the left fender looked dented. It might still run, but not reliably. Frank shook his head, dusting off his gloves. "You can try starting it, but the undercarriage might be damaged. If you want, I can tow it to our local shop. They'll take a look." Emily, huddled in her coat, came closer. "Yes, please," she said, expression grim. "I don't trust it on the open road like this." Frank nodded. "I can drop it off at Riley's garage in town. They're honest folks. Might be a day or two before they can fix anything. Maybe they'll order parts if it's serious. You folks can catch a ride with me down the mountain if you want." Daniel glanced at Emily. This was it. The moment they'd have to decide their next move. She looked torn, scanning the snowy cabin, then Daniel's face. Her voice was subdued. "Maybe we should all go. Jacob and I, we can't stay here without a working car. And if you have things to do, we shouldn't—" "You can come with me," Daniel said quickly, stepping in. "I'll drive us all back to the city. My SUV is in a secure parking area at the foot of the mountains." He turned to Frank. "You think we can ride with you to the main station? I can call for a car service or get my staff to send a driver from there." Frank shrugged amiably. "Sure, I can drop you. Gotta go that way anyway." Emily's gaze shifted from the tow truck to Daniel, clearly torn. "Are you sure about this? I don't want to impose or complicate your schedule." He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, a bold but earnest gesture. "Emily, you're not imposing. I want to help. Let's get out of this cold. Then we can sit down somewhere warm and figure out next steps, together." Her eyes glinted with moisture, gratitude blending with apprehension. At last, she nodded. "All right, let's pack up whatever we have here." They agreed that Daniel would gather his belongings, scattered files, clothes, and electronics, while Emily and Jacob quickly packed up the few items they'd brought from the stranded car. Frank busied himself securing the sedan to the flatbed, calling out that he'd wait as long as needed. Inside the cabin, the three of them bustled around. Jacob's excitement was apparent. He was eager for the next adventure. Emily methodically folded the borrowed clothes Daniel had lent her, setting them on the bed. Meanwhile, Daniel stacked his laptop and important papers into a sleek briefcase. The last day and a half felt like an entire lifetime compressed into a bubble of revelations and shifting priorities. Finally, with coats zipped and bundles of personal items in hand, they stepped out onto the freshly plowed path. Daniel paused in the doorway, glancing back at the cabin's interior. The fireplace was cold now, the embers long extinguished. The space seemed emptier than before, as though the intense emotion shared within these walls had seeped away with them. Jacob tugged on Daniel's sleeve, drawing him out of his reverie. The boy's face shone with a mixture of curiosity and the unshakable belief that grown-ups always have a plan. Taking a breath, Daniel shut the cabin door, ensuring it locked behind him. The caretaker could handle the rest, once Daniel called to explain. Frank gave them an encouraging wave as they approached. With some effort, everyone climbed into the warmth of the tow truck's cabin, the smell of diesel and leather seats strangely comforting after so much time in the rustic lodging. Daniel settled next to Emily, with Jacob squeezed between them, looking up at the dashboard with fascination. As the truck rumbled down the winding mountain road, Daniel felt the tension in his shoulders loosen. No matter what awaited them at the bottom, stalled deals, anxious employees, or the looming conversation about how to integrate Emily and Jacob into his life, he felt a surge of purpose. This was the direction he needed to go. Forward, together. Jacob gazed out the window at the receding forest. Buddy, the stuffed dog, clutched tight. He made occasional exclamations about the tall snowbanks or the way the sun sparkled on ice. Emily's hand rested on Jacob's knee, a gesture of protective closeness. Daniel watched them with a slight smile. Despite everything uncertain and daunting, a quiet hope lodged in his chest. He thought about the city, where he had a spacious penthouse that often felt too large for one person. He thought about how Emily and Jacob might settle there, if only for a while, how the boy would respond to the bustle of skyscrapers, how Emily might find new sewing clients or set up a small studio. The idea of them forging a new life under his roof both thrilled and terrified him. The tow truck rattled on, each curve bringing them closer to whatever lay beyond the storm's aftermath. Daniel inhaled deeply, turning his gaze to the snowy peaks. One day at a time, Emily had said. Well, he was ready to try that. Ready to try fatherhood, responsibility, and the uncertain terrain of forging bonds that had been denied for too long. At that moment, as the truck's tires crunched over salt and slush, Daniel slid an arm behind Jacob's seat, and his fingers lightly brushed Emily's shoulder. It wasn't quite an embrace, but it felt like a promise, one he intended to keep. They were only an hour's drive from the mountain cabin, but the stark contrast felt like crossing into another world. Once Frank dropped them off at a modest service station at the base of the range, Daniel arranged for a company driver to pick them up, much to Emily's wide-eyed hesitation. She protested that a simple taxi would do, but Daniel insisted, pointing out that she had baggage, a child, and a car in the shop to coordinate. So it was that a sleek, dark SUV arrived on the salted parking lot. The driver, a polite older gentleman named Marcus, stepped out to greet them. "Mr. Kensington," he said with a nod, opening the passenger door. "Good to see you safe. I trust your trip was eventful?" Daniel managed a faint smile. "Eventful is one way to put it, Marcus. Thank you for coming so quickly." Marcus tipped his cap in acknowledgement, then glanced kindly at Emily and Jacob. "Any luggage for the trunk?" Emily shook her head, holding Jacob's hand. "Just a few bags," she said softly, hefting the small suitcase that held her and Jacob's clothes. Daniel had his own briefcase and duffel slung over his shoulder. Marcus took them without fuss, placing everything neatly in the back. The ride into the city was smooth and strangely silent at first. Jacob, still buzzing with energy, pressed his face to the window, marveling at how the mountain scenery gradually gave way to suburban sprawl, and then to the rising skyline. Emily sat near him, looking tense, her fingers occasionally tapping an agitated rhythm on her knee. Daniel watched them both from the opposite seat, his mind churning with possibilities and half-formed plans. He was taking them to his penthouse. Even that word, penthouse, seemed dauntingly grand for a woman and child used to more modest living. But he wanted them close, if only for a short while, until they figured out the next steps. More than that, he wanted to shield them from the precarious uncertainties of Emily's patchwork housing arrangements. During the last stretch of highway, Daniel finally broke the hush. "Emily," he said quietly, leaning toward her so Jacob wouldn't overhear, "I'll show you both to my place, get you settled. But if at any moment you feel uncomfortable or need something else, please tell me. I'm not trying to push you into anything." She exhaled as if releasing pent-up anxieties. "Thank you," she said. I'm not used to all this. Having a personal driver, going to a penthouse, it's a bit surreal." Daniel nodded, understanding the swirl of emotions behind her words. "I get it," he said, though he wasn't sure he really did. His life had been a far cry from Emily's for so long that bridging the gap felt like standing on a tightrope. Jacob, oblivious to the subtleties, piped up from the window. "Look at all those big buildings. Are we going to live in one of them?" The question made Emily and Daniel exchange a quick glance, each silently wondering how to answer. "We'll stay with Daniel for a little while," Emily ventured, choosing her words carefully, "until our car is fixed and we decide what to do next." "Cool," Jacob said, resuming his wide-eyed stare at the skyscrapers. Daniel could almost feel the intensity of Emily's internal tension. He wanted to reassure her that he wasn't going to demand anything she couldn't handle. But for now, he settled for a comforting squeeze of her hand, which lay tensely on her lap. She glanced at him, startled, but didn't pull away. Their eyes met, a silent acknowledgement of all that hung in the balance. The Kensington Tower loomed over the bustling city center. It wasn't actually his tower. He was just a key investor in the luxury high-rise, but it might as well have been. His penthouse suite occupied the top floors, boasting a panorama of glittering streets and neon-lit avenues. As Marcus steered into a private entrance, Emily swallowed nervously, her posture rigid with apprehension. They took a reserved elevator straight from the lobby to Daniel's penthouse level. The interior gleamed with polished marble and mirrored walls. Jacob gaped at his reflection, poking at it as the elevator whooshed upward. Emily gripped the suitcase, her eyes darting from the opulent surroundings to Daniel's calm profile. "It's really not as fancy as it looks," Daniel joked quietly, though he knew the statement was ridiculous. By most standards, it was absolutely that fancy. Emily managed a short laugh, tinged with nerves. "If you say so." When the elevator doors slid open, they emerged into a private foyer with tall double doors at the end. Daniel typed a code into a sleek keypad, and the lock clicked open. The doors swung wide, revealing a sprawling living area with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Plush sofas, modern artwork, and gleaming hardwood floors reflected the afternoon sun. Jacob took one step inside and froze, eyes darting around in amazement. "Wow," he breathed. Emily hovered behind him, looking equally stunned but trying to maintain composure. "Welcome," Daniel said softly, gesturing them inside. He felt a pang of self-consciousness, wishing he'd had time to declutter. But the place was already immaculate, maintained by a discreet housekeeping service. A faint scent of fresh linen and citrus polish lingered in the air. Marcus brought in the bags and set them near the entryway, then departed with a polite nod, promising to be on call if needed. The door shut behind him, leaving the three of them in the quiet grandeur of Daniel's home. Jacob took a few cautious steps forward, as if he feared his footprints might mar the shining floor. "Is this your house, Daniel?" he asked in hushed wonder. Daniel knelt beside him, heart twisting with a mix of pride and guilt. "It's where I live, yes," he said gently. "Make yourself at home, okay? There's plenty of space." Jacob nodded, still looking gobsmacked. His stuffed dog, Buddy, hung limply from his grasp. Even that toy seemed out of place against the sleek, minimalist design. Emily slid out of her coat, folding it over her arm. I'm not sure what to say," she murmured, taking in the panoramic view of the city skyline through the windows. "You live here by yourself?" Daniel nodded, rising. I used to think it made sense, lots of room for business meetings, entertaining clients, that sort of thing. But to be honest," he trailed off, scanning the silent expanse of polished floors and tasteful furniture. "It's been lonely." Her eyes flicked to him, sympathy and understanding mingling in her gaze. Jacob, picking up on the shift, broke into a run, bounding across the living room. "Mom, look! There's like 1,000,000 windows!" Emily hurried after him, gently reminding him not to get too close to the glass. Daniel watched them with a tightness in his throat. His place had never felt like a home. But seeing a child's excitement bounce off the walls, hearing Emily's soft laughter. For the first time, he felt a glimmer of life in these sterile rooms. After a moment, he cleared his throat. "Let me show you around," he offered, awkwardly resuming a host-like manner. He led them through the open-concept space, pointing out the kitchen with its gleaming appliances, the dining area with seating for 8, and a smaller media room that housed a large TV and comfortable couches. Jacob eyed the TV setup with visible longing. "Wow, can I watch cartoons on that sometime?" Daniel chuckled. "Sure, we'll set it up for you. Maybe not right this moment, but soon." At the far end of the penthouse, a hallway branched off to the bedrooms. He paused in front of a guest suite with a plush queen bed and adjacent bathroom. "You can sleep here?" he said, addressing Emily. Then he turned to Jacob. "And there's a pull-out bed in the sitting area, or we can get a cot. Whatever works." Jacob piped up, "Can I sleep in the bed with Mommy?" He looked uncertain, as if big new places made him cling to the familiarity of her presence. Emily gave a gentle nod. "Sure, if you want. At least until you feel comfy on your own." Daniel felt a pang. The scene was so domestic, yet he hovered on the fringes, unsure how to insert himself into their routine. "If you need anything, extra blankets, pillows, just let me know," he offered, half apologetically. Emily set down her suitcase on a luggage rack. "Thank you, Daniel. It's a lot to take in, but I appreciate everything." Her sincerity cracked his defenses. Without thinking, he stepped forward and touched her elbow lightly. "You don't have to keep thanking me. I'm doing this because I want to." He swallowed, lowering his voice to keep Jacob from overhearing. "And because I owe you, both of you, so much." She stared into his eyes, and he could sense the swirl of emotions beneath her guarded expression. They'd known each other once, in the flicker of college days, but not like this. Now, they were on the threshold of something entirely new, intimate, daunting, and uncharted. Emily broke the tension by glancing at Jacob, who was exploring the side tables near the bed. "We should unpack a little," she said quietly. "Jacob's clothes and pajamas. Then maybe we can figure out dinner?" Daniel nodded, stepping back. "Of course. I'll give you two some space. Let me know if you need help." He left them to settle in, retreating down the hallway. In his own bedroom, sleek lines, muted colors, a panoramic window, he set down his duffel and sank onto the bed. Head in hands, he inhaled, trying to quell the tremor in his chest. Every day since the blizzard had felt like a year's worth of emotional upheaval. Now that he was back in his usual domain, he couldn't ignore the sense that everything was about to change permanently. Before his thoughts spiraled too far, a buzz on his phone startled him. Reception in the city was, of course, excellent. He glanced at the screen, multiple missed calls from his VP, plus urgent emails flagged about a major acquisition deal. With a grimace, he realized his corporate world had not paused during his mountain interlude. He tapped to read one of the top messages. "We need your final sign-off. Contract negotiations can't wait any longer. Please advise ASAP." Tension coiled in him. He'd been stalling the acquisition, uncertain if he should push it forward. But now, with fatherhood overshadowing every concern, even a multi-million-dollar deal felt strangely trivial. That was a radical shift for him, and he knew the board wouldn't understand. Still, duty beckoned. He pressed a button to call his VP. The line rang only once before the man answered with relief. "Daniel, we've been trying to reach you for days. Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Daniel said, trying to muster the controlled tone he used in boardrooms. "Had an unexpected situation. A blizzard trapped me in the mountains. Now I'm back." He could almost hear the flurry of thoughts on the other end. "That's good. Listen, about the Reddington deal, I know." Daniel cut in, his voice sharper than intended. He glanced at the bedroom door, mindful that Emily and Jacob were just down the hall. "Look, I need more time to review. We can't rush. Set up a teleconference for tomorrow morning. I'll have final comments prepared by then." The VP started to protest. "But the other party is pushing for tomorrow," Daniel repeated firmly. He couldn't deal with corporate meltdown while also navigating brand new fatherhood. "I'll confirm my availability. That's final." He ended the call before more objections could arise, dropping the phone on the bed with a sigh. So much for a graceful re-entry into his old life. He rubbed his temples, fighting a headache. He could sense the fault lines between his old corporate self and this new paternal role. Soon, he'd have to find a way to merge them, or risk losing one for the other. A soft knock on the open door made him look up. Emily stood there, timid. "Hey," she said gently, nodding at the phone. "Work?" He exhaled. "Yeah. They're anxious about a deal. I told them to wait until tomorrow." She stepped forward, stopping a few feet away. "I don't want to make your life harder," she said, voice trembling. "Jacob and we can find a motel if you need space. You've already done so much." "No," Daniel cut in, rising to his feet. He hated the idea that she felt like a burden. "You're not making anything harder. The deal can wait. You and Jacob can stay as long as you like, or as little as you like. We'll figure it out together." Tears brimmed in Emily's eyes, and she looked down, a mixture of gratitude and anxiety. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel wanted to embrace her, to close the distance, but he wasn't sure if that was overstepping. He settled for gently touching her shoulder. "We're in this together," he repeated, voice low. She swallowed, nodding. A moment passed in poignant silence, broken only by Jacob's distant voice as he wandered the penthouse calling, "Mommy, come see this view!" Emily gave a small, shaky laugh. "I'd better see what he's doing. I think he found the switch for the blinds." Daniel's heart softened. "Go on, I'll be right behind you." She left, and once again Daniel was alone in the quiet. He thought of Jacob, wide-eyed and fearless, exploring a place that was fancy but empty. He thought of Emily's uncertain gaze, the courage she mustered to accept his offer and share space with him again after years of separation. This penthouse, once a symbol of power and isolation, now held the potential to become a real home, if he could figure out how to be the father and partner they needed. Steeling himself, Daniel stepped into the hallway, following the trail of Jacob's excited squeals. Fatherhood was no longer a hypothetical. It was alive and pressing, demanding everything from him. And for the first time in his life, Daniel felt ready, or at least determined, to rise to that challenge. Jacob's excited voice echoed through the penthouse's open layout as he dashed from one window to the next, enthralled by panoramic views of a city that stretched beyond the horizon. Late afternoon sunlight angled in, bathing the upscale interior in warm gold. Emily trailed behind her son, torn between urging him to calm down and marveling at his giddy wonder. A small smile crept onto her face whenever she looked at him. She could hardly blame the child for being mesmerized by a world so unlike anything he'd known. Daniel approached with careful steps, inwardly torn. On one hand, he relished the sound of Jacob's laughter bouncing off walls that had long lain silent. On the other, his mind buzzed with the demands of the corporate realm he'd put on hold. He hovered in the living area, exhaling slowly as he watched the mother and child. Emily paused at the wall of windows, her gaze sweeping across skyscrapers illuminated by the lowering sun. She touched the glass gently, as if confirming it was real. "This view," she murmured. Daniel offered a tentative smile. "It's the reason I chose this unit. When I moved in, I thought it might inspire me. But after a while, it all felt the same, just another city skyline." She let her fingertips slide away from the glass. "You must be busy a lot. I can't imagine you get many days to sit and watch the sunset." He rubbed the back of his neck, a wave of guilt prickling at him. "Not really. Work usually takes over. When I first started earning enough to afford a place like this, I convinced myself it was the ultimate sign of success." His voice softened. "Now I'm not so sure." Emily gave him a curious look, but said nothing. In the hush, Jacob twirled back toward them, brandishing his stuffed dog. "Daniel," he piped up, "there's a big TV in that room, right? The one with the comfy couches?" Daniel nodded, chuckling. "Yes. Want to see if we can find a channel for cartoons?" Jacob's eyes lit up. "Yes, please." Emily took a step forward. "But just for a bit, Jacob. We should think about dinner soon." Jacob nodded fervently, bounding off in the direction of the media room. Daniel followed, gesturing for Emily to come along. The media room was cozy by penthouse standards. A large sectional couch flanked by bookshelves, a wide screen dominating one wall. A discrete console held various devices, all connected by meticulously labeled cables. Daniel flicked the TV on, navigating to a child-friendly channel. "There," he said as animated characters popped onto the screen, bright colors swirling. Jacob slid onto the couch, eyes fixed on the action. Within seconds, he was transfixed, letting out small laughs at the cartoon's antics. Emily hovered near the doorway, her arms folded, a half-wistful expression on her face. "He's so enthralled," she whispered. "He's rarely had a chance to watch anything on such a big screen." Daniel moved closer, speaking softly so as not to distract Jacob. "He can watch whenever he likes, within reason," he added with a playful grin, echoing the typical parental stance. Then, more seriously, he asked, "You hungry? Maybe we can order something in, or I can whip something up. I'm not the best cook, I admit." Her lips quirked in a shy smile. "I can handle something simple. Unless you had plans to phone in a fancy dinner?" He shook his head. "Fancy can wait. Let's do something normal. Pizza or pasta. I'd rather eat at the table with you two than have a 5-star meal alone at some soulless restaurant." She considered him a moment, searching his face. "All right, pizza then. Jacob loves pepperoni if you have it." "I'll order from a place nearby," Daniel said. "They deliver quickly. You'll like them." Emily hesitated, then nodded. "Sounds good," she said quietly. "Thank you." As she walked back into the living area, Daniel grabbed his phone and found the local pizzeria's number. He placed a quick order for a large pepperoni, plus a vegetarian option for Emily. He recalled vaguely from their conversations up at the cabin that she often avoided heavier meats and requested a side of garlic bread. The small routine act of ordering family-sized pizza gave him a strange sense of anticipation. Typically, he ordered takeout for himself or catered to impress visiting executives. The idea that he was now feeding a child, his child, and Emily under his roof felt monumental. He returned to find Emily sitting on the edge of the sectional, watching Jacob with fond eyes. "It'll be here in half an hour," Daniel informed them softly, settling onto the couch's arm. "Yay!" Jacob piped up, eyes still glued to the cartoon. "I like pizza." Daniel chuckled, letting the boy have his cartoon-induced bliss. Meanwhile, Emily glanced at Daniel. "Any updates from the mechanic? About my car?" He shook his head, feeling a twinge of regret. "Not yet. I can call tomorrow if they don't reach out, but—" He hesitated, a bubble of tension in his throat. "Emily, even if your car is fixed soon, you don't have to leave immediately. If you want to stay a bit longer and figure things out, like your next living arrangement, I'd be happy for you to do that. Both of you." Jacob glanced over at them, interest piqued. "Are we staying here, like for a while?" Emily shifted uncomfortably, unsure how much to reveal in front of her son. "We're visiting Daniel, sweetie," she said gently. "We'll see how long we can stay, depending on everything else going on." Jacob nodded slowly, lips pursed as if digesting that. Then he turned back to the cartoon, though Daniel could sense the boy's curiosity swirling just beneath the surface. He felt a pang, knowing they still hadn't told Jacob the truth of his parentage. He slid off the couch arm and motioned for Emily to join him in the hallway out of earshot. She cast a cautious glance at Jacob, who was thoroughly entertained, then stood. In the quieter corridor leading back toward the foyer, Daniel leaned in, heart pounding. "I don't want to blindside him, but we should figure out how or when to tell him I'm his dad. Or if you want me to keep playing the role of a friend for now, I don't want to step on your authority." Emily looked torn, her gaze flickering to the living room. "I've been wondering the same thing. Every day we wait feels like a lie of omission, but if we just come out and say it, he might be confused or feel betrayed that I didn't tell him sooner." Daniel took a deep breath. Is he old enough to handle it directly? She tilted her head, thinking, he's more perceptive than most kids his age. He'll ask a million questions. But I believe if we reassure him we both love him, he'll adjust. Better now than years later. He nodded, stomach tight. Then, maybe after dinner? We can sit down together, just the three of us. We'll keep it simple and honest. Emily exhaled a tremulous breath, relief and fear mingling in her eyes. Yes, after dinner might be best. Less chance of distractions. We'll do our best to explain. Daniel reached out, gingerly touching her shoulder. We're in this together, remember? You'll lead the conversation, and I'll follow your cue. I want him to know he's safe, that I'm not here to disrupt his life or take him away from you. Her eyes glistened. Thank you. That's exactly what I need him to understand, too. A faint buzz from the penthouse intercom startled them both. The pizza delivery must have arrived. Daniel cleared his throat. I'll get that, he said. Emily nodded, returning to the media room to gather Jacob for dinner. Minutes later, the three of them sat at the large dining table. Jacob perched on an elevated chair Daniel had quickly adjusted so the boy could reach his plate easily. Steam rose from 2 pizza boxes in the center, and the aroma of fresh dough and melted cheese wafted through the air. "Smells so good," Jacob exclaimed, eyes gleaming as Daniel opened the first box to reveal a classic pepperoni. The second box, a veggie-laden pie, also looked appetizing. Emily cast a grateful smile at Daniel for remembering. They served themselves in a flurry of excited chatter. Jacob asked about different toppings, poking curiously at the vegetables on Emily's slice. He made a face at the sight of spinach, causing Daniel to stifle a laugh. Despite the tension of their earlier conversation, the meal itself felt surprisingly light. Perhaps it was the universal comfort of pizza that broke down barriers. Midway through the second slice, Jacob piped up with a question. "Daniel, do you go to work in a big building like the ones we saw?" He chewed, swallowing. "Mommy says you do business." Daniel nodded, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "Yes, I work in an office tower downtown. We do things like invest in companies, buy and sell parts of them." Jacob frowned, brows knitting. "That sounds complicated." Emily giggled softly, ruffling her son's hair. "It is complicated, sweetie. Daniel helps run a big company, but that's enough business talk for now," she teased, glancing at Daniel. "Let's enjoy the pizza, Jacob gave a silly salute. "Aye, aye, Mommy." He munched contentedly. At that moment, Daniel caught Emily's eye, reading the unspoken message. "We'll talk after dinner." He gently cleared his throat and asked Jacob about his preschool, what he liked best. what subjects were his favorites. The child lit up, describing his friends and games. Emily chimed in with small anecdotes about class projects. Daniel listened intently, storing each snippet of Jacob's life in his mind like precious keepsakes. Soon enough, the pizza boxes were nearly empty, and Jacob leaned back with a contented sigh. "That was yummy," he declared, tapping his belly. "I might explode if I eat more." Emily rose, stacking plates. "No exploding allowed," she teased. "We need you in one piece." Daniel stood, gathering a few used napkins. "Let me help," he offered, carrying plates to the spacious kitchen island. Jacob trailed behind, still brandishing Buddy the stuffed dog. They piled dishes in the sink. Despite the penthouse's expensive dishwasher and perfectly organized cabinets, there was a cozy normalcy in the act of clearing a table as a small group. As they finished, Emily gave Daniel a meaningful look. He nodded, feeling his pulse quicken. This was it, the moment they'd approach a subject that would forever alter Jacob's understanding of his family. Daniel's hand felt clammy against the smooth surface of the counter. "Jacob," Emily said gently, touching her son's shoulder, We want to talk with you about something important, okay?" The boy blinked, curiosity bright in his eyes. "Am I in trouble?" She smiled, shaking her head quickly. "No, not at all. It's just... Well, can we go sit on the couch for a minute? It'll be easier to explain." Jacob nodded, hugging Buddy closer. "Sure." He glanced at Daniel, noticing the tension in the man's posture. "Is everything okay?" Daniel forced a reassuring smile. "Yes, Buddy, everything's fine. We just need to tell you a secret. Well, not really a secret, but something we should have told you sooner." He exchanged a glance with Emily, who gave him a small, supportive nod. They moved to the plush sectional couch in the living area. Jacob took the middle seat, Emily settling on one side, and Daniel on the other. The city lights outside glowed in the twilight, reflecting off the penthouse windows. It felt oddly intimate, as though the vast metropolis had receded, leaving just the three of them in a cocoon of quiet anticipation. Emily began softly, gathering her thoughts. "Jacob, remember how you sometimes ask me about your dad? Where he is? Why he never visits?" She swallowed, her voice thick with emotion. "Well, the truth is, I've known who your dad is for a while, but I was afraid and unsure how to tell you. And then, by some twist of fate, we ran into him, literally, in the storm." Jacob's brow furrowed. "We did?" Daniel leaned forward, heart thumping. "Jacob, I'm your dad," he said quietly. "Emily and I knew each other a long time ago. We got separated and lost touch, and I didn't know about you until recently, but I promise, if I had known, I would have been there for you." The boy's eyes went wide, flicking between Daniel and Emily. "You're my dad?" he repeated in a near whisper. Buddy the dog slipped from his grasp, forgotten on the cushion. Emily nodded, tears glinting. "Yes, sweetheart. Daniel is your father." A swirl of emotions flitted across Jacob's face. Surprise, confusion, a hint of betrayal. He gnawed his lower lip. But you called him Daniel, not Dad. And he was just your friend, you said." She exhaled shakily. "I was scared of how you'd react. I never meant to lie to you, but I wanted to wait until the right time. Then everything happened so fast." Jacob stared at Daniel, scanning his face as if seeking confirmation. "Are you sure?" he asked, voice trembling slightly. "You're really my dad?" Daniel felt the sting of tears behind his eyes. He reached out carefully, resting a hand on Jacob's shoulder. "I'm sure," he said thickly. "I know this is sudden, but it's true. I missed a lot of your life, and I'm so sorry for that. But I want to be here for you now." The child blinked rapidly. "So, does that mean you love me?" Daniel's composure cracked. He let out a shaky breath. "Yes, Jacob. I love you. I'm learning more about you every day, and all I want is to be the best dad I can be." Jacob stared at him, big tears forming in his eyes, though he looked more overwhelmed than upset. Emily wrapped an arm around the boy's back, gently rubbing. "Mommy loves you too, sweetie," she whispered. "We both do. Very much." For a long heartbeat, Jacob just sat there, lips parted. Then he launched himself forward, burying his face against Daniel's chest. The small arms circled Daniel's ribs in a fierce hug. The gesture was uncoordinated. Buddy squished in the mix, but it radiated raw, childlike emotion. Daniel let out a trembling exhale, returning the hug with infinite care. His eyes stung with tears that slipped down his cheeks. Over Jacob's head he met Emily's gaze, and in her eyes he saw relief, sorrow, and a quiet sense of hope. "I'm sorry," Jacob mumbled against Daniel's shirt. It's so weird. But I'm happy too, I think." Daniel stroked the boy's hair, heart brimming. "It's okay to feel weird. I do too. We'll figure it out together." Emily leaned in, hugging them both in a gentle cocoon. For a moment, the three of them stayed there, locked in an embrace that felt simultaneously fragile and unbreakable. The city lights sparkled in the backdrop, but none of them noticed. They were lost in the quiet wonder of belonging, something Daniel had never truly felt in this penthouse until now. Eventually, Jacob pulled back, sniffing. "So, can I call you Dad now?" His voice wavered with shy excitement. Daniel's breath hitched. "I'd like that," he managed. "Yes, please do." Jacob nodded, wiping his nose on the back of his sleeve. "Okay, Dad," he murmured, a tentative grin forming. Emily pressed a hand over her mouth, stifling a sob of mingled relief and sorrow. Daniel wrapped his free arm around her shoulders, pulling her closer. The trifecta of connection was almost too much. So many lost years, so many unknowns ahead. Yet in that moment, it felt right. They remained there for a while, letting the weight of the revelation sink in. Outside, the city sparkled and pulsed with a million stories. But in Daniel's penthouse, only one story mattered. The new story of a father, mother, and child weaving a family bond in real time, forging love out of uncertainty. When they finally separated, Jacob asked, "So do we live here now?" His voice was bright with possibility, as if no challenge seemed insurmountable. Daniel glanced at Emily, heart thudding. "For as long as your mom is okay with it," he answered. "We'll make it work. Together." Emily, tears still shining on her cheeks, nodded softly. "We'll figure it out. One day at a time." Jacob nodded, snuggling closer to both of them. The hush returned, not the fragile hush of secrets, but the warm, quiet hush of a promise kept. The city's neon glow washed over them, illuminating a newfound sense of purpose. Tomorrow would bring questions of how they'd navigate shared custody, finances, personal histories. But for now, in the embrace of each other, they had a moment of peace. A starting point for a family that had, until then, existed only in heartbreak and longing. "Dad," Jacob repeated, almost testing the word's sound. His face lit up when Daniel smiled. "Yes, son?" Daniel replied gently. Jacob giggled. "Nothing. Just wanted to say it again." Emily let out a soft laugh and Daniel's heart soared. No million-dollar deal, no corporate accolade, no towering penthouse window could eclipse the raw, honest joy of that moment. They were truly, finally, together, and for Daniel, it felt like coming home. Soft morning light filtered through the tall windows of the penthouse, painting the plush living room in gentle tones of gold. On the sofa, Daniel stirred awake to a curious sight. Jacob curled up at one end, Buddy the stuffed dog squished beneath one arm, fast asleep. At some point in the night, the boy must have wandered from the guest room and nestled onto the couch, where the dazzling city view had lulled him into slumber. A warm feeling bloomed in Daniel's chest. He carefully rose from the armchair where he'd dozed off, crossing the room in quiet steps. Though the penthouse was typically silent, a space built for solitude, this morning it felt different, vibrant, alive. The presence of Emily and Jacob had transformed these rooms into something more than a showplace of wealth. Daniel tucked a blanket around Jacob's shoulders, moving with the gentle caution of a father not yet accustomed to the simple intimacies of daily life. The child stirred slightly but didn't wake, lips parting in a sleepy sigh. Outside, the city hummed to life, muffled traffic and distant horns weaving into a lullaby. He glanced at the wall clock, noting it was early, just past 7. Ordinarily, he'd be up by now, jogging on his treadmill or scanning through emails. But today, his priorities felt wildly different. Suddenly, an important meeting or an urgent contract negotiation seemed less pressing than making sure his new family felt at home. A soft sound behind him made him turn. Emily stood in the hallway wearing a borrowed robe and looking slightly rumpled from sleep. She offered a tentative smile. "Morning," she whispered, following his gaze to the sleeping Jacob. "Morning," Daniel murmured back, stepping closer. "He must have come out here sometime after you both went to bed." She nodded, her expression a mix of affection and lingering disbelief. "He does that sometimes. Likes to explore new spaces at night." She paused, letting the hush cradle them. "How are you feeling today?" The question carried deeper meaning than mere physical well-being. Daniel gave it a moment's thought. "Honestly, overwhelmed," he admitted, "but also determined. I want to do this right, for him, for you, and for us." She exhaled softly, relief flickering in her eyes. "Me too," she whispered. "Thank you for telling him the truth last night. I know that was huge for you." Daniel shrugged one shoulder. He deserved to know, and seeing him call me Dad. His voice caught. "It's something I never thought I'd hear." Emily laid a hand on his arm, a gentle gesture. "You're doing fine so far. It'll take time to figure out the day-to-day, but we'll get there." He placed his hand over hers, cherishing the simple contact. "Let's talk more over coffee," he suggested, gesturing toward the open kitchen. "We can let Jacob sleep a bit longer." She nodded, and they tiptoed away from the living room. The kitchen's sleek counters and stainless steel appliances gleamed in the morning light. Daniel rummaged quietly for coffee beans, measuring them into a fancy machine that rarely got used. Soon the hiss of steam and the aroma of fresh brew filled the air. Emily perched on one of the island stools, pulling the robe snug. "I'm not used to all this luxury," she said softly, glancing around. "It's beautiful, but it's a lot to process." Daniel set 2 mugs on the counter, then leaned against it, facing her. "I know, and I don't want you to feel like you have to change to fit in here. If anything, I need to change the way I've been living. Alone, consumed by work. I want this place to feel as much yours as it is mine, at least while you're here." She studied his face. "But you have a life, a busy one. Are you sure you can make room for a child's needs and the chaos we bring?" He inhaled deeply, swirling the coffee in his mug. "I'm not certain how my board or my schedules will adjust, but I've realized that if I don't make space for Jacob now, I'll regret it forever. Work can wait, or at least it can be restructured." A small, earnest laugh escaped. "I run the business after all. I should be able to carve out fatherhood in the midst of it." Her eyes warmed, a hint of admiration flickering there. "That's really good to hear." She sipped her coffee, savoring the warmth. "I guess the next question is how we handle daily routines. Preschool, my work, assuming I can find some freelance sewing opportunities here, and your schedule. We'll have to juggle a lot." Daniel nodded. "Let's figure it out step by step. First, I was thinking we could find a preschool near my building or here in the city. I can help cover the fees, obviously, and if you need a place to do your sewing, we can set up a spare room. I have more than enough space." her cheeks colored slightly, gratitude and vulnerability warring in her expression. "That would be amazing," she murmured. "I haven't had a proper sewing studio in ages. I don't want to rely on you too heavily." He reached across the counter, taking her hand. "Emily, I want you to rely on me. I missed too many years. Let me do this." She squeezed his fingers, blinking back tears. "Thank you." They were interrupted by the sound of padding footsteps. Jacob shuffled into the kitchen, Buddy clutched under one arm, hair rumpled from sleep. He rubbed his eyes, yawning. "Good morning," he mumbled. "Morning, Buddy," Daniel greeted, smiling warmly. "Want some breakfast?" Jacob nodded, climbing onto a stool next to Emily. "Cereal?" he asked hopefully. "Or toast with jam?" Emily smoothed a hand over his back. "We'll see what's in Daniel's cupboards," she teased, arching an eyebrow at Daniel. He set his mug aside. "Let's check. I'm not sure I have jam, but I do have cereal and probably some bread. We can always get groceries later." Jacob brightened at the mention of going shopping, as though every new chore in the city was a fun adventure. "Yay, I can help pick the food!" Emily laughed softly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "We'll make a list," she promised. While Daniel set out a box of cereal and milk, Emily rummaged in the fridge for any fruit that might still be fresh. She found a small container of blueberries. Jacob eyed them approvingly, tossing a few into his cereal bowl. They all moved around each other in a surprisingly graceful dance, as though they'd been doing it for years instead of hours. Once breakfast was served, they ate in an easy companionship, Jacob describing his dream the night before, something about being an explorer in Daniel's giant house, and Emily chiming in with how she used to love exploring new places as a kid. Daniel mostly listened, content to watch them interact. At one point, Jacob paused mid-bite. "Dad," he said, trying the word again, "can we do something fun today, like see the city?" Daniel's heart squeezed at the sound of "Dad" on the boy's lips. He nodded. "Absolutely. If your mom is up for it, we could start with a quick grocery run, maybe walk around a park, see the city sights, whatever you two feel like." Emily smiled into her coffee, seemingly relieved that Daniel wanted to spend family time instead of burying himself in phone calls. "That sounds great," she agreed, "though we should probably keep it short. Jacob's had a lot of excitement already." Jacob made a face as though the idea of stopping any adventure early was unthinkable. "I'm not tired," he insisted, which only made Emily laugh. They ventured out mid-morning. Daniel led them down to a smaller, private parking garage beneath the building, where he kept a spacious SUV. Jacob exclaimed in delight over the tinted windows and sleek interior, bouncing slightly on the back seat. Emily, adjusting to the city's hustle, looked wary but resolute. First stop was a nearby grocery store, one Daniel rarely entered as he'd long depended on a delivery service. Pushing a cart felt foreign in his tailored coat, but he found himself oddly thrilled by the normalcy of it. Jacob insisted on helping, riding on the front of the cart while pointing to items he recognized: cereal, fruit snacks, peanut butter. Emily, eyes shining with a mixture of humor and relief, guided them toward healthier options as well. They navigated the aisles, occasionally drawing curious glances, perhaps from the difference in their attire or the child's excited commentary. Daniel suppressed a grin every time Jacob tugged on his sleeve, saying, "Dad, can we get this?" For yet another treat. He gently reminded the boy they had limited fridge space. Emily gave Daniel a soft, grateful smile, appreciating how he balanced indulgence with practicality. After checkout, they loaded groceries into the SUV, then headed to a nearby park Daniel remembered. A small oasis amid skyscrapers. It featured a pond, a winding walkway, and even a modest playground. The winter chill was still in the air, but the day was clear. Jacob scampered along the path, giggling when he spotted ducks waddling by. Emily, hugging her coat close, breathed in the crisp air with a small smile. They paused at the edge of the pond where a few brave ducks paddled, hoping for breadcrumbs from passers-by. Jacob crouched, enthralled, while Emily stood close, ensuring he didn't lean too far. Daniel watched them from a short distance, heart swelling at how natural it all felt, like pieces of a puzzle sliding into place. "You see that big one?" Jacob called, pointing. "He's the leader duck." Emily chuckled. "Leader duck, huh?" She shot Daniel a glance, and they shared a warm moment, understanding how small wonders like this had been absent from Daniel's life until now. Eventually, they circled back to the playground. Jacob clambered up the steps to a small slide, squealing with delight when he slid down. A handful of other children played nearby, their parents chatting or watching from benches. Emily took a seat on one of them, exhaling. "He's so happy," she whispered to Daniel, who sat beside her. Daniel nodded, gazing at the boy in wonder. "Yeah, he's amazing." A twinge of regret underpinned the pride in his voice. "I only wish I'd been there from the start." Emily touched his arm lightly. "You're here now. Don't let guilt overshadow everything. Jacob doesn't need perfection, he just needs you, present and caring." He swallowed the lump in his throat. "Thank you," he managed, voice low. They watched as Jacob chased another child around a climbing structure, shrieking with laughter. Emily leaned into Daniel's shoulder, a tentative closeness, and he placed an arm around her. The breeze chilled their faces, but the shared warmth made it bearable. Before long, the wind picked up and the sun ducked behind a cloud, reminding them it was still late winter. Emily stood, calling Jacob over gently. "Time to head back, buddy. It's getting cold." Jacob pouted but complied. "Can we come again tomorrow?" he pleaded, cheeks flushed. Daniel ruffled the boy's hair. "We can make it a habit," he promised, sending a meaningful smile Emily's way. By the time they returned to the penthouse, arms laden with grocery bags, Jacob was chattering about the ducks and how he planned to name them next time. Emily laughed, her tension visibly easing compared to when they first arrived. Daniel helped unload groceries in the modern kitchen, placing items carefully while Jacob demanded to put away snacks. The day felt fulfilling, anchored by a sense of shared routine. Yet, as the afternoon shadows stretched across the living room floor, Daniel's phone buzzed, another reminder that he couldn't fully ignore the corporate world. He glanced at the screen. His VP texted, "Urgent, teleconference in 30 minutes, must finalize details." Daniel pursed his lips, aware that he'd promised to review the final terms of that big acquisition. He'd only briefly skimmed the documents the night before. Tension sparked in his gut. He glanced up to see Emily watching him carefully. "Work?" she asked softly. He nodded. "I need to handle a call soon. It might take a while, and I'll have to lock down in my office to focus. I'm sorry." She nodded in understanding, though a flicker of disappointment crossed her features. "It's okay. We'll keep ourselves occupied. I'll help Jacob with some drawings or something." Jacob overheard. "A call? Boring," he declared with a grin. "Can I watch more cartoons?" Emily chuckled, gently chastising him with a look. "Maybe after we do a bit of reading, then you can watch a short show, okay?" He shrugged in playful resignation. "All right, Mom." Daniel exhaled relief. He approached Jacob, kneeling to meet his eye level. "I won't be too long, buddy, just some grown-up business stuff. After that, maybe we can do something else fun this evening?" Jacob smiled. "Okay, Dad." The single word, Dad, still jolted Daniel with a surge of emotion, but he managed a steady nod. He squeezed Jacob's shoulder lightly, then stood, heading toward the penthouse's home office. Emily gave him a small, sympathetic wave as if to say, "Good luck." Inside the office, Daniel shut the door gently. The space boasted a wide desk, multiple computer monitors, and tall bookshelves. Rarely had he felt this divided, stepping back into a domain that once defined him. Sitting down, he opened the laptop, launching a video conference platform. The screen lit up with the faces of board members and the VP, all wearing stiff expressions. "Daniel," the VP greeted formally, "glad you could join." Daniel forced a businesslike nod. "Let's get started." The meeting plunged him into corporate jargon, synergy, valuations, strategic expansions. Yet as slides rolled by, he felt a new distance from it all. Yes, he was good at this, but fatherhood beckoned from the other side of that closed door, overshadowing the once unassailable importance of deals. He asked incisive questions, scanning contract clauses for potential pitfalls. In the back of his mind, he remembered Jacob's giggle at the playground, Emily's quiet support. Could he balance these worlds, the father and the corporate titan? He had to try. After an hour of tense negotiations, Daniel hammered out a compromise with the prospective acquisitions lawyers. The board members seemed pleased, albeit slightly confused by his newfound insistence on personal time. He ended the call with a decisive, "Thank you. Send me the final draft for signature," and closed the laptop, shoulders sagging. Stepping out of the office, he found Emily and Jacob sprawled on the living room rug, crayons scattered around them. Jacob was drawing a huge building, presumably the penthouse tower, with stick figures that labeled Mommy, Dad, and Jacob. Buddy the stuffed dog made an appearance in the corner. Daniel's chest tightened with affection. "What's all this?" he asked, kneeling beside them. Jacob beamed, lifting the picture. "It's us, living in the tall building. That's you," he pointed to the tall stick figure, "and that's Mommy, and that's me. See Buddy here?" Daniel nodded, throat thick with emotion. "I love it," he said. "Maybe we can frame it." Jacob's smile spread from ear to ear. Emily gave Daniel a questioning look. How did the call go? With her eyes. Daniel mouthed, "It's done," feeling an odd sensation of relief. He'd survived the first real collision of fatherhood and career. He sat down fully on the carpet, removing his tie as if shedding the last vestiges of corporate formality. Jacob immediately scooted closer, explaining every detail of his drawing, while Emily watched them with a gentle, approving gaze. Later, as evening descended, Daniel found himself cooking a simple pasta dish with Emily's guidance, while Jacob hovered, taste-testing bits of sauce. This was life now, a blend of short business calls, grocery runs, hasty dinners, and a child's laughter ringing against high ceilings. And for Daniel, it felt more fulfilling than any acquisition victory. He was forging a new kind of success, one built not on profit margins, but on love, trust, and the messy, glorious reality of family. A month slipped by in a series of small, ordinary milestones that felt extraordinary to Daniel. His once quiet penthouse now thrummed with the rhythms of a child's laughter, scattered crayons on the coffee table, and evening meals that involved more conversation than cautious, lonely silence. Emily and Jacob were still living with him, though they all spoke about eventually finding a more balanced arrangement once they were sure everyone's needs were met. In that time, Daniel juggled intense work obligations with family life in a way he never imagined possible. He rose earlier to share cereal with Jacob before the boys knew preschool hours. The short drive downtown became a daily ritual. Daniel would drop Jacob off at a small but reputable preschool near his office, then head into Kensington International's headquarters. Emily often used the quieter daytime hours to meet with potential sewing clients or refine her craft in a corner of Daniel's spare room, which she had converted into a makeshift studio. As for Jacob, he adjusted to city life with wide-eyed enthusiasm. He marveled at tall skyscrapers, new foods, and especially the fact that his dad worked in one of those shiny buildings. Every afternoon, Daniel picked him up, greeting him with a warm hug in front of the preschool's gates. And every afternoon, Jacob chattered about the day's adventures, finger painting, story time, new friends, while Daniel listened, absorbing each detail with a delight that eclipsed any boardroom triumph he'd ever known. Emily watched these father and son moments with a sense of tentative peace. She was still cautious, still unaccustomed to a life that no longer hinged on constant financial worries or precarious housing. Yet Daniel's quiet determination to support her and Jacob eroded her barriers day by day. He was patient, and though he still managed big corporate deals, he always carved out time to be present at home. One late afternoon, Daniel led them both through his office lobby, wanting Jacob to see where he worked. The towering glass structure soared above them, and Jacob clung to Daniel's hand, his eyes flicking around the polished floors and business-suited employees who bustled by. Emily accompanied them with a soft smile, noticing how the staff paused to do double takes. After all, seeing their typically reserved CEO wandering through the corridors with a small boy was a novelty. They rode a private elevator up to Daniel's executive floor. The doors opened onto a sleek reception area, where a nervous-looking assistant greeted them, clearly unsure how to handle the sudden arrival of the boss's family. Daniel reassured her with a smile, introducing my son Jacob and his mother, Emily. The assistant offered them refreshments, to which Jacob responded eagerly, "Juice, please," making Emily and Daniel share an amused look. In Daniel's corner office, a view of the city sprawled out in every direction, similar to the penthouse but with a sharper, more corporate feel. Jacob scurried to the window, pressing his face against the glass. "Wow, Dad, you can see everything," he exclaimed. Emily's gaze settled on Daniel, who watched his son with an expression of pride mixed with disbelief that this was all really happening. She stepped closer, resting a hand lightly on his arm. "He's so proud of you," she murmured. "I think he'll brag to his preschool friends that his dad has the best view in the city." Daniel let out a soft chuckle. "I hope he'll brag about more than that, like the times we read stories together, or how he's teaching me all his favorite games. The view is nice, but—" He trailed off, eyes warming with paternal devotion. She smiled, nodding in understanding. "You're a bigger part of his life now. That's what matters." Their quiet exchange was interrupted by a hesitant knock on the open office door. Daniel's VP stood there holding a stack of files. "Sir, apologies, but the final documents for the Reddington deal just arrived. You mentioned you'd like to finalize them this afternoon." Daniel's stance shifted. In the past, he would have dropped everything to handle a pivotal acquisition document, but a glance at Jacob, who was making funny faces at his reflection in the window, reminded him of how he wanted to live now. "Thanks, Carter," Daniel said smoothly. "I'll review them in a moment. Actually, can you give me 15 minutes? The VP nodded politely, eyeing Emily and Jacob with careful curiosity. "Certainly, sir." He backed out, leaving them alone again. Emily looked at Daniel in gentle amusement. "We can wait outside if you need to handle business." Daniel shook his head. "It can wait, truly. There's no crisis. I'll sign them once I've shown Jacob around." He turned toward his son, feeling a surge of gratitude that he had the power to decide such things. "Jacob, want to see my desk? Or maybe try out the big chair?" Jacob's eyes lit up. "Yes, please." Daniel led him behind the imposing wooden desk, helping him climb onto the high-backed leather chair. The child giggled, tapping at the desk's surface with a sense of self-importance. "Dad, when I grow up, can I work here too?" Daniel's heart squeezed at the earnest question. "You can be anything you want, son," he replied. "If you decide to work with me, I'd be honored." Emily hovered near a row of framed accolades and pictures. She picked up one photograph, a group shot from a corporate function, and turned it thoughtfully. "You've accomplished so much in such a short time," she said quietly. "It's impressive, but I'm guessing it came with sacrifices." He nodded, stepping away from Jacob to stand beside her. "Yes, I sacrificed personal relationships, connections. You and Jacob most of all. But now I see things differently." A gentle hush settled as Emily replaced the photo. "I'm glad," she whispered. Jacob slid off the chair, bounding over. "Mommy, can we go see the cafeteria next? Do they have hot chocolate?" Daniel laughed. "We can definitely see if the break room has cocoa packets. although calling it a cafeteria might be generous. He guided them out of the office, feeling lighter than ever. 10 minutes later, they were in a modest employee lounge area. Jacob gasped with delight at the drink machines. Emily helped him operate one, carefully ensuring the cup was secure. Daniel watched, reflecting on how seamlessly fatherhood and corporate life blended in this moment, something he never expected. The staff who passed by offered polite nods and friendly smiles, and more than once Daniel caught astonished looks of approval as employees realized their famously driven CEO had a softer side. By late afternoon, they'd said their goodbyes to the building, Jacob clinging to Daniel's hand the entire ride down the elevator. Outside, the mild winter sunshine cast long shadows across the sidewalk, and the city bustled with end-of-day energy. They decided to walk a few blocks together, exploring a local bookstore and a small bakery before heading home. As the sun dipped below glass facades, they returned to the penthouse, arms laden with new books for Jacob and a bag of pastries Emily couldn't resist. The routine had become almost comforting. Daniel punched in the security code, the elevator whooshed them upward, and soon they were in the spacious living room with dusk painting the skyline in warm hues. Jacob flopped onto the couch, rummaging through the bag of pastries until Emily gently reminded him to wait for dinner. Daniel stepped aside to call for Chinese takeout, checking off each family member's preference with a certain satisfaction. Dumplings for Emily, orange chicken for Jacob, and a spicy dish for himself. That evening, after the meal, they gathered in the media room. Jacob introduced them to a new cartoon he'd discovered, a whimsical adventure about two siblings exploring hidden worlds. Emily and Daniel sat on either side of him, the flickering TV reflecting on their faces. At one point, Jacob snuggled against Daniel's arm, resting his head on his father's shoulder. Emily noticed how Daniel's lips curved into a deep, contented smile. When the show ended, Jacob stretched and yawned. "I'm kinda tired," he admitted. "Is it okay if I go to bed?" Emily smoothed a hand over his hair. "Of course. Let's get you tucked in." Then she hesitated, glancing at Daniel. Would you like to tuck him in tonight?" Daniel's heart leapt. "I'd love to," he said softly. They led Jacob to the guest suite, which had gradually become more of a child's domain. Scattered drawings taped to the walls, a small set of new pajamas in the drawers, Buddy the dog perched on the pillow. Jacob climbed into bed, nestling under covers. Daniel knelt at the bedside, feeling an unaccustomed wave of fatherly tenderness. Emily retreated to the doorway, giving them a moment of privacy. Daniel smoothed the blanket and pressed a gentle kiss to Jacob's forehead, echoing a gesture he'd once seen from caring parents. "Sleep well, buddy," he whispered. "I'll see you in the morning." Jacob smiled, eyes heavy-lidded. "Night, Dad. Love you." Daniel's throat constricted at the words. "I love you too," he managed. Then he rose, flicking off the overhead light, leaving only a soft lamp to guard against the darkness. Emily offered him a quick, grateful nod as they stepped back into the hallway, carefully closing the door behind them. She exhaled, leaning against the wall. "He's never gone to bed this willingly," she mused with a smile. "Must be all the excitement." Daniel found himself face to face with her in the softly lit corridor. A hush filled the space between them, carrying the residue of the day's quiet triumphs. A preschool drop-off, an office tour, warm family dinners. A million unspoken emotions swirled: gratitude, relief, lingering uncertainty about what lay ahead. "I hope this doesn't feel like a temporary arrangement to him," Daniel said quietly. "I don't want him to worry we'll vanish." Emily's eyes glistened. "He's adjusting well, but yes, we need to keep talking to him, reassuring him we're steady. Children sense everything." She paused, gathering courage. "And what about us, Daniel? Where do we stand?" He stepped closer, gently taking her hand. "I can't pretend I have a perfect plan for every detail," he admitted. "But I do know I want both of you in my life. not as a short-term fix, not as an obligation, but because He swallowed, searching her gaze. Because I care deeply about you, Emily, and I love Jacob. I want to see if we can build something real, a family. Tears welled in her eyes, though her smile was luminous. I want that too, she said, voice trembling. I'm scared sometimes, but I can't deny how right it feels when we're all together. He reached up, lightly brushing away a tear from her cheek with his thumb. Slowly, tentatively, he leaned in. When their lips met, it was a gentle, hesitant kiss, filled with the echoes of lost time and the promise of a shared future. Emily's hand slid up to rest against his chest, and for a breathless moment they stood in the quiet hallway, hearts thrumming in unison. When they finally parted, she rested her forehead against his, exhaling shakily. "One day at a time," she murmured, echoing the mantra they'd used since the cabin. Daniel nodded, eyes shining. "One day at a time," he confirmed. They stayed there for a lingering second, the city's nightlights shimmering through the windows beyond. Then, hand in hand, they walked back to the living room. The glow of the skyline wrapped them in a peaceful hush, as though the vast metropolis recognized a new story being written high above its streets. A CEO who found more than corporate success, a mother who discovered the courage to share her secret family, and a child who, at long last, fell asleep each night knowing both parents were there to keep him safe. The path ahead wasn't easy. There would be arguments, misunderstandings, balancing acts between Daniel's corporate demands and Emily's independent streak. Jacob would have his own challenges adjusting to a new environment. But for now, the three of them held onto one promise, that they would face every storm, every question, side by side. In a penthouse that once echoed with loneliness, new life blossomed, and Daniel Kensington, once consumed by business deals and power plays, learned that the truest and most priceless investment of all was the love he was finally free to give and to receive. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.